son. He reminded me.
Sorry?
I just bumped into your son. He's like, can you remind my dad?
What? Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this special Governance Priorities Committee meeting to order. In the absence of the chair, I want to recognize that our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. I apologize for the lateness. Because as much as we recognize today, we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. We also had a gathering at City Hall earlier at lunchtime around educating people about Orange Shirt Day and reconciliation and the experiences of the residential school system that have so scarred the Indigenous peoples of this country. And it was a very worthwhile event and will be the first of many more that will help educate all of those who work for the City of Nanaimo. The question period sign-up sheet is on the petition wall near the gallery. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, they're welcome to write down their name and the agenda item on the sheet. In the conclusion of the meeting, I'll call up those who've signed up to the podium to address council. Ms. Gurry, you're nodding, and I'm guessing I've missed something.
No, Your Worship, there just is a late item that's not noted on your annotated, and it's to do with the motion at the end of the agenda.
Thank you. Okay. So the late items, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the recommendation regarding the under Community Wellness Livability, the correspondence dated September 20th, 2019 from Richard Stewart, Mayor of City of Coquitlam, requesting support ride-hailing letter to Minister of Transportation. The recommendation, according to Your Worship, should be that a motion that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommend that Council support the taxi industry's request to provide a level playing field with all transportation providers. And if that is correct, then the agenda could be amended if Council's in agreement to that.
Please. We need a motion for the amendment?
You can just adopt the agenda as amended, and or if there is discussion about that, it could happen at that time.
Then I'd call for a motion for adoption of the agenda as amended. So moved. Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favour? Motion carries. Thank you very much. A motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved, Councillor Bonner. Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favour? Motion carries. This is quite the educational afternoon in some respects. So, Ms. Gurry, I'm going to turn it over to you for introductions, and appreciate the first item is the governance review.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Rudolph has just arrived, so he might want to add a little bit before the presenters start. But first, I'd like to say good afternoon and not apologize for the venue. It's a beautiful venue, but this is a Governance and Priorities Committee, and we do like to do them in a workshop format, and this is a little more formal than we would like. So if you could all just keep in mind that this is a Governance and Priorities Committee. My staff will be doing some presentations today, and they're quite nervous. And but they've done a wonderful job, and they've worked really hard. And I'd just like to say that I'm very lucky, and actually the City of Nanaimo is really lucky to have such hardworking and dedicated staff. So they've worked hard on today's presentation, and you will be getting an overview of our agenda today. Will be listed on the screen if I have a clicker. See, they're way better at this than I am. Thank you, Natalie. An agenda overview for today that's listed up there will be going over governance engagement, transparency, and administration. And then they will be going over the procedure bylaw amendments. I will be covering the agendas committee, and Ms. Snellgrove, Sky, will be going over the notice of motion procedure, as well as additional committees and meeting procedures. Both myself and Sky will go over that. So I'm going to call them by their first names just to make them feel a little bit more comfortable, and feel free to do that as well. I'll be jumping in throughout the presentation today to add some further input and or answer any questions that my staff are unable to. So first off, unless Jake would like to say something, I'm going to have Natalie come up, and she's going to go over the governance engagement part of the presentation. Yeah. No.
Time. So yeah, this is very much a workshop. So if you would just imagine if it's not on those pages, a word watermark that says draft for discussion on any of these pages. That's really what it's intended. And, so staff have put a lot of effort into trying to make this an information session, not only for council, but for those that may be watching if they choose to stream in to see a piece of this. We're going to go over some of this fairly quickly, especially in the engagement piece at the beginning, but it was important to lay the groundwork so that those that have an interest on the subject of engagement are aware that not only are we going to be talking that in the context of committee of the whole and council meetings, but also there's a broader context. So we're seeing this in contextually correctly. So I just wanted to make sure that you know, she has already said, you know, we're sort of sorry about the venue, but it's hopefully we'll still see it as a workshop, and it's more informal. And our aspirations are to provide council with a lot of opportunity this afternoon. We actually have 3 hours to discuss all things related to committees, task forces, engagement, procedure bylaw, and anything else. And so the goal is to get through it and see where we land. And if council is comfortable with the procedure bylaw piece, even with adjustments, then that would enable us to bring that forward. Otherwise, we will need to do some more work on that piece. So just bringing it forward, and it's your day, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Rosenbach.
Given Councillor Turley's
Sorry.
away, no, I was just curious. You're chairing the
Yes.
you know,
He's the acting mayor, so unless someone else wants to chair this meeting, I'd be happy to defer. Does anyone want to experience? I'm quite serious when I'm making this offer. You'd like to, wouldn't you?
Pardon?
Would you like to chair?
I did not prepare with the intention to chair, so next time I would be more than happy to. But
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for this opportunity to share with you today. I'm not used to this clicker. Here we go. Okay. So my role supports both the legislative services and the communications departments. I'm involved in both the legislative processes, what we'll be hearing about more today, as well as the process for engaging with the community through our various communication channels. Earlier this year, Ms. Gurry gave a presentation on committees and engagement, and it highlighted the ways that the City of Nanaimo already engages with the community. And today we'd like to focus specifically on governance engagement. So for the purpose of today, that is ways that residents of our community can engage with council, what kind of opportunities that are available for participation, the resources that are available for informing on council's decisions, and access to information. So just want to touch briefly on some of the engagement opportunities available between council and community members, although I'm sure you're all quite familiar with them at this point. Members of the public are invited to attend open council and committee meetings where they can ask questions and appear as delegations. Public hearings, council has the opportunity to hear from members of the public regarding any proposed changes to the official community plan or the zoning bylaw. Other opportunities include community events and e-town halls, and of course we provide contact information for mayor and council so residents are able to reach out to their elected officials directly. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through this whole list, but it does provide a snapshot of some of the ways that we inform on council decisions and initiatives. It's a mix of digital and traditional methods, so things like social media, and then also newspaper, radio ads. For the sake of time, I'm just going to kind of pick out and highlight a couple of these. Video recordings are available of all the council, GPC, and finance and audit committee meetings. This isn't a legislated requirement, but it does allow those that aren't able to attend the meetings in person the opportunity to stay informed firsthand, which is really great to have. And council and committee meeting summaries. These are a document we publish after each council, committee, and task force meeting, and they basically capture any decisions made around the table in an easy-to-read format. The benefit here is that even those with really busy schedules can stay up to date with the important work being done. So that's something that we like to offer, and we also include that each week when we send out the newsletter, a direct link to those. And so for what's new, in recent months, we have implemented closed captioning of council meetings. We'll be talking more about accessibility later in the meeting, but this is a good first step that we are still working on fine-tuning with eScribe. The Health and Housing Task Force, which is chaired by Councillors Bonner and Hemmons, brings together many of the key pieces involved with addressing the complex issues facing our community. In August, we launched the City of Nanaimo's Instagram account. If you're not familiar with Instagram, it's one of the most popular social media platforms worldwide. It's an image-based platform. It's especially popular with the younger demographic, so using this tool in conjunction with our other social media sites like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, it really helps us reach out to a wider audience and inform on the different council initiatives. And finally, our, excuse me, our new weekly e-newsletter, My Nanaimo This Week. This is sort of a one-stop shop. It helps us inform on any current and upcoming projects, events, initiatives, and as well as communicate about the upcoming meetings for that week, council meetings, task force meetings, committee meetings. They're posted to the homepage of the city's website, and they're promoted via social media as well. So the nice thing about this is a lot of our information we share through Facebook and Twitter and avenues like that recently, but not everyone's on social media. So this way, we post it to the homepage, and as people get familiar with knowing these are there, each week they can just log onto the page and then click on the link, and then they'll kind of have everything in one easy-to-read format. All right, and so what's coming next? So the Environment Committee is going to be starting to meet this fall. It's co-chaired by Councillors Brown and Gethebrocht, who I'm sure are quite eager to start digging into some of those items. And you'll be hearing more from Mr. Lindsay and Mr. Corson soon regarding the official community plan and economic development steering committees. And later this afternoon, Ms. Gurry will be speaking to you regarding a new committee for your consideration, and that's the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness. And finally, we're excited to begin using our newly acquired public engagement software. The platform we'll be using is Bang the Table, and staff training is starting, actually tomorrow is when that's going to be starting. And the nice thing with public engagement software is it really does open up a lot of doors in terms of how the city is going to be able to interact with, hear from, and involve the community. I won't get into all of that now because we've just had a really brief training session where we kind of got a little bit of a window into it. But it is quite exciting, all the opportunities that are going to be out there. And as we get closer to the launch of the OCP Plus process, for lack of a term right now, it'll help us engage with the public on the topics that matter to them most. And this is my final slide for now. So as a council, you've identified environmental responsibility, governance, excellence, livability, and economic health as the 4 pillars of your strategic plan. So by using online engagement through the committees, task forces, steering committees, along with all the other methods mentioned previously, we're committed to supporting council and encouraging residents in the community to stay informed and to be engaged. So that's for me. So thank you. Unless you have any questions, I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Gurry, and she'll speak about the FOI releases. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gethebrocht.
Thank you, Chair, Mayor, through you to staff. I just was curious in terms of updates to the community on items that we have done and accomplished, and also messaging around, say, particular policy items. What is the main conduit to the newspapers and journalist community?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor Gethebrocht. There's a number of ways that we let the public know the decisions that you make at the committee level and or the council level, or other initiatives that you undertake and that are good news stories. So the many different ways that we get those stories out there is either through that e-newsletter, through council or committee summaries that we do the day after the meeting. The council minutes or committee minutes are the official record of the meetings. And then we do many news releases. So there's one being done right now to highlight the events on the UBCM that you covered last week, as well as I believe council will be giving an update on Monday's council meeting at the mayor's report section. So there's a number of ways. Also, social media is a huge way that we communicate with the public as to council's initiatives, either what they've accomplished or what's upcoming. So any platform that we can engage or inform the public, staff have been actively using it. Does that help?
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, it sounds like there's an incredible array of different avenues that the message is getting out. I'm curious, is this different, say, compared to like 2 years ago? A bit, or have there been changes or increases compared to 2 years ago?
As one wise counselor, I think it was Counselor Hemmons once said, can we do better? Always. So we've always strived to do better. Like, can we engage better? Yes. So it's been constant improvements. So we are more active on social media, I believe, now, but we have always had, the staff have always done as much as they can with the resources that they've had available. Now there's more of a focus on it, and we're trying to streamline those processes and get a better bang for our buck in what we have been doing. So just enhance the engagement and information that we're already putting out there, making it better, and always working hard to improve it, and different avenues. Like some suggestions that have come even from Jake, Mr. Rudolph, is to, for those that aren't on social media, some on council aren't on social media, Jake might not be on social media. So the e-newsletter was a way to engage and inform those members of the public that aren't active on it. So it's via your website. So if you have access to email or the internet, you can go to our website and have all of the stuff that we put in Twitter and Facebook and posts and all that information and good news, all available in non-social media users, easy to use format. So in some ways it might be like looking back, but looking ahead as well. We're just trying to make all that information accessible for everybody.
Wonderful, if I may. No, it's a wonderful orientation to always be refining and adding, and from the list of things that you listed off of how we're communicating, I mean, it's quite an array. And I know before council, I was always surprised of all the different things the city had been doing, and that was a common complaint. Oh, it's like the city just needs to communicate more to people what it is already doing, and I know this council has already accomplished a lot, and just making sure that message does get out there and refining it, because I think people would be impressed with what has been going on so far. So thanks for your efforts. And
Thank you. So part of what I was going to say, oh, yeah, sorry,
Councillor
go ahead.
Armstrong.
Oh,
I just want to know if there's an opportunity to discuss other committees we'd like to have today.
yes, so through you to Councillor Armstrong, at the end of the meeting, we will be talking about additional committees, the new proposed committee that's ahead in the presentation about the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness. There'll be opportunities for you to talk about more committees that you may like to have at that time. So as Natalie was mentioning, yes, sorry?
Councillor Hemmons,
Okay.
you're popular.
I'm sorry, I'm just jumping ahead.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councillor Gesselbrock's question, when the Community Engagement Task Force was struck, one of the first things that we did was do an audit of all of the ways that residents can engage with council, and the list was actually surprisingly comprehensive. And so I think in terms of communicating how people can share their insights with us or kind of get into issues with us, there's actually a lot of opportunities to do so, and I think it's partly our job as councillors to continually share that with the community. These are ways you can get in touch with us. It's not just email, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to share that was a pretty interesting exercise as a resident to see all of the ways that you can engage with mayor and council that I wasn't aware of.
And just to add to that, Chair, part of this process today, most of you may already be aware of the many ways we do engage, but some in the public might not be. So this opportunity for them to see the video, watch the slide presentation, just to see the many ways that they can engage. And communications, I think, always does get kind of a bad rap for needing to do more and do better. But it's really communicating about the communication that we have available and getting that word out there, because it has always been there. Yes, we can always do better, and we constantly are improving our processes, but we have been very thorough, and I think we do a really great job at communicating. And part of your strategic theme and strategic plan was good governance, was one of those themes. And part of good governance is transparency. And transparency is good engagement and good communications, and it will kind of lead on to the next part of my slide, unless there's any more questions about communication. Okay. So one of the components of good governance is transparency and good administration. So we've already covered the many engagement opportunities that we already have and what is new and what is coming. So coming forward as well, you'll also be shown some statistics that will show that there have been more delegations, more meeting types per month, and many more engagement opportunities available than were previously available in previous terms of council. So you folks have actually had staff work harder to provide more engagement. I'm trying to, so staff have worked hard to try to implement council's desire for more communication, more engagement, and just to dispel any myths out there to the public that this council has been less inclusive or less engaging with the public. That's actually not been the case, and there'll be some statistics later in the slides to show that. So just going forward, some more governance transparency that staff have been working on are FOI releases on our website. So previously released FOIs will soon be available on the city's website. So the sample image is provided there. The information will be arranged by year, and a release package will include a response letter with personal information redacted and responsive records attached. So this has been an initiative that I've wanted to do for years. It's just a matter of time and resources to do this. Not very many of our requests under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act can be released because most of it are individuals asking for their own personal information, therefore we can't publish that. But requests that we receive from the media are one of the main ones that we can release. Once the media has had the opportunity to use the information, and publish it, as that is their right for making the request, we can then publish the information and make it available to everybody else. So there are certain categories of requests that will not be released, requests for personal information, and Nanaimo Fire Rescue incident reports and photos. So those are requests we get quite often under the Act. And then staff are currently working on these release procedures so that they'll be implemented as each file is closed. And this will cut down on the extra and additional staff time and resources to make it easier on them. So it'll be part of the process. And here's just an idea of the flow chart for FOI releases, what staff take into consideration, whether or not it can be released or not. And that is my part for the FOI releases on the website, and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. You'll recognize Jessica from being the recording secretary at many of our meetings, and she's going to talk about the in-camera releases unless there's any question on the FOI releases. I think Councillor Bonner has.
If I may just ask, well, Councillor Bonner's here first, please.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. The point you meant, Nanaimo Fire Rescue incident reports and photos, we do get FOIs on those, and they get released to the person who presented them, and then they go anywhere they want. Why would we hold them off the website?
Because many of the times the person requesting or the company, which is usually ICBC, requesting those reports is for the person that was in an accident or an issue. So that information can be released to them, but not to the public. So that is why those reports won't be part of the release package.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering, Ms. Gurry, it's an unfair question perhaps, but obviously there are some requests for FOI that involve what I will call politically motivated, in the sense interesting to see if council has made, had come to decisions, how it's come to decisions, et cetera, but just the overall cost of FOI requests and responding to them for the city. Do you have any idea how much staff time is involved or budget estimates?
Last year in 2018, we had our highest number of requests ever, and quite high in relation to other large municipalities such as Vancouver or Surrey, who had 500 or 600. Compared in population size, 420 in Nanaimo was huge. It's significantly reduced this year, but still over 200. I think we're at 237, I think it says somewhere in maybe the next slide, is still a large number. So staff resources, we have had extra FTEs since 2016. We've had an additional FTE that has been added to that work. And The cost recovery is non-existent. Basically, if somebody requests their own personal information under the Act, we're not allowed to charge for it. The first 3 hours are free, so some of these requests are quick and easy, and they don't take the 3 hours. And some of the records that we have to do the searching for, because we don't have, we will be having, and it's underway, an electronic records management program. Because of our not up-to-date records management practices, we can't then charge the citizen for our out-of-date records management practices. So there is no cost recovery, and last year it was between 10 to 14 hours a day spent responding to and dealing with FOI requests. This year, I would say it's still about 10 hours a day, so that's a 7-hour workday, so it's at least 1.5 full-time people working on FOIs per day.
Thank you, and I hope anyone listening will be cautious when they consider whether or not they really require an FOI request if they're just going on what I will call a curiosity expedition, because it is costly to the city and taxpayers. Thank you, Councillor Armstrong.
Just to follow up on that, is there a way, because I know a lot of the time spent looking through our emails, through the archive, that we should be setting up a thing where we know something's probably going to be FOI'd and throw it in there? Would that make it simpler? Or like, I know for me, for the notes on McCleary, they'll be turned over in a package so that everything is there. Because I know a lot of times when we have to search for our notes, they don't exist, and then that creates problems later for FOI.
We do currently have a system in place. It's not the best, but we do have an archive system where we can retrieve council correspondence, at least your emails, if we need them for an FOI request. And we do send you the emails and ask you either your consent to do that search and or ask you to send them to us yourselves. As for a filing system, that is underway. We are starting our pilot project, so electronic records management, there will be proper processes and procedures where if it's not an email, and even if it is an email, it'll be a better system where we can ensure we capture all of it, and it will help ease at least the search time for FOI requests.
And just to follow up on that, is that being done for all text messages on phones as well?
No, so we do have a policy, and city business is not able to be done. Staff and council should not do city business via text message because we do not have the technology to download those text messages, and TELUS won't provide us those text messages. So we actually went through the OIPC for this and had to put that policy in place. So because we're unable to actually capture those text messages, staff and council should not do city business via text message.
Thank you.
Okay. So now Jessica.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm just going to move ahead. All right, good afternoon. I'm going to tie in a little bit with what Sheila's just been speaking about as far as transparency, and I'm going to provide an overview of the process for the release of in-camera information. All right, so to start, I'll point out that the routine release of in-camera agendas, the policy, was amended July 22nd of this year, and the policy provides for the routine release of in-camera agendas with the reports and minutes included. This is not a legislated requirement that council release in-camera information. However, routinely releasing these documents once confidential obligations have been completed supports council's strategic plan related to governance excellence on openness and transparency, while balancing the need to protect personal information and sensitive information. The provision of this information does not limit a person's ability to access the records under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, but the hope is that it will, by providing the information publicly, it might reduce the need for some FOI requests. The in-camera release webpage can be found here on the city's website, and I've got a link on the page there. Currently, this webpage provides documents from 2010 up to the third quarter of 2017 in the old format, which was to release the in-camera documents in quarterly sections arranged in bundles.
So staff are currently preparing and reviewing the 2018 and 2019 in-camera documents according to the newly amended policy, which will see each agenda posted by meeting date on this webpage. Perfect. So items released through the routine release of in-camera agenda policy have gone through a number of review steps before they're published to the website, and this is to ensure that the items that still need to be kept confidential have been severed or redacted. And where items have been redacted, there will be a blank space within the document, and in some cases, entire reports have been taken out. And the routine release of in-camera agendas policy will lay out what items should be commonly redacted. However, some of the more common items are listed there on the slide for you. And this last slide is just to provide a snapshot of the operational process for the release of in-camera agendas. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to move away from talking about in-camera.
Sorry, Councillor Hemmons has a question.
Thank you. This might be for Ms. Gurry. Rise and report, can you walk me through how that function works?
I'm sorry, walk you through what?
Yeah, so the rise and report,
Oh.
so that happens during an in-camera conversation when we want to report on something that night in advance of it going on the website. That's a tool we can use to do that.
That's correct. So previously, the rise and report function was for, a lot of it was for the in-camera release process, the previous one. But what rise and report can do and should do is after an item is discussed in camera, if there's no third-party information or nothing that needs to be negotiated or done, you could do a rise and report that very evening and or at the next council meeting, as long as there was none of those other implications that applied. So you could do it either way. You could rise and report once all of that confidential information has passed, which we already do now in this process under the new policy, or if it's something that just needed the actual decision to be made in camera, but there's no third party or other information that can wait, or it won't be that long to wait for it to be able to be risen and reported on, you could make that motion after dealing with it in camera.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason, just to add to what Jessica was talking about, the reasons that we would redact some of that information, normally if it was done through a Freedom of Information request, that information may be released, whereas it's not in this process. And the reason for that is because third-party information requires us under the Act to ask and let the third party know that this information is being requested. So we have a duty under the Act to let that third party, whether it was a business or personal information contained in the in-camera information, we have a duty under the Act, Section 23, to let that third party know that the request has been requested and allow them to provide feedback on the release of it. And then we have to wait for that feedback and take that feedback into consideration. So in order to streamline this release of in-camera information release outside of the FOI process, we just will not release third-party information, period.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, through you to Ms. Gurry, could you just clarify, Ms. Gurry, what exactly is the format for rise and report? Because I think there's a misconception that means a formal press release or something to that effect. So could you just comment on that?
If and when council decides or makes a motion to rise and report on a matter that was just dealt with in camera, and there's been a resolution, a motion, and then another motion to rise and report is then subsequently made, that means that staff can go public and or council can go public with that information in either the way council had decided it can go forward. So council could say to do a press release, rise and report in a press release or a news release. It could be done that way, but if it's not specified as to what way, it's just any way goes. So, or it doesn't have to be a news release, it doesn't have to be released any specific way. It could just be broad.
So council is just open to talk about it. Thank you.
That's correct.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'm going to move into governance administration then. So as one of the stenos in the Legislative Services Department, I help review reports and prepare agendas for council and committee meetings. Our team works with staff from every department to prepare the type of agendas that you have in front of you today. And I'd like to give a brief overview of what that process looks like. So as you're aware, the city uses a software program called eScribe to prepare and manage reports, agendas, and host video streaming. We began transitioning to the use of eScribe software in 2017, and we fully implemented in 2018. Since then, we estimate that our paper consumption has been reduced by half. So in 2016, before implementing eScribe, we estimate that we were printing 57,600 pages of paper for council agendas. And the graph on the right is just meant to give a visual of the paper consumption for transitioning from paper printed agendas to eScribe published agendas.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I'd just like to make a point that it's not only paper that's being consumed, but there's a lot of wear and tear on the expensive Xerox machines and ink to produce that. So thank you. Great work on the reduction.
Yeah. And just to add to that, our goal is to be 100% paperless. We just need to get everybody on board with that. And you're right, Councillor Gesselbrock, Legislative Service has two of the largest printers in the city, and that's because of this work.
Councillor Thorpe and I are beyond excitement.
Okay, well, you guys took the words right out of my mouth. Because the goal of our department is to encourage the use of the paperless agendas with the goal of reaching 100% paperless agendas in the future. So I'm glad everyone's excited. Okay. That's okay. All right, so now I'll touch really briefly on the process for what preparing those agendas and reports looks like. The slide above just lays out the general cycle for one report, and it's only the time frame where the Legislative Services Department is involved. I won't go into much detail about it because, of course, you're all able to review it beforehand, and it's fairly straightforward.
Just a quick addition to this, the reason I asked staff to kind of put in this administrative operational slide is to kind of show, and this is a high level, each one of these steps has probably at least 10 further steps that go as a part of it, to show the work that goes into preparing an agenda. Some councillors think it might be magic, that it just appears in front of you, but there is a lot of work that goes into preparing an agenda and a lot of staff time, and the cycle is quite long, and it's twofold that I wanted this included. One is for the procedure bylaw amendments. As when we amend a procedure bylaw, I want council to be aware of all the things that have to be considered for the logistical purposes. So we have to do a lot of figuring out how it's going to work and put it into a bylaw format, as well as the agendas committee and for the governance and priorities committee, how you can add items to that agenda and what staff recommend coming up in that report, because of all of these other steps that go into preparing an agenda for any type of committee or council meeting.
Okay. So the next cycle is similar layout. It's for the agenda itself, and it follows that really similar 3-week time frame for preparing. Right. If there's no other questions, I'm going to move into a few statistics here. So in keeping with the theme of meetings, I've prepared a few graphs for some visuals on numbers relating to meetings. I've tried to ensure the most accurate representation that I can, and therefore each year is being compared based on only the first 7 months. I've used the first 7 months because August was an abnormality in 2019, as it was the first year where only one meeting was scheduled, and of course we're not finished this year. So these first 3 graphs represent the average number of monthly meetings, lengths of those meetings, and the average number of delegations to appear at a regular committee of the whole meeting. So the first graph on the left represents the average number of meetings in a month. And one thing to note on this graph is that it includes the committee meetings. So for 2019, the committees are only just getting started in this time frame, versus 2018 and 2017, they would have been in full swing. So the second graph in the center represents the hours of a council meeting. And as you can see, the length of the meetings are getting shorter. This is likely reflective of the addition of the consent items to our agendas that streamline the meetings quite a bit. The third graph on the right represents the average number of delegations to appear at the Committee of the Whole, where people can bring forward items that were not on the council agenda. And this last graph, I hope it can be clarified. This graph represents each meeting, or how often each meeting type is meeting on average. So in 2019, there were only 10 different types of meetings during this time frame. By comparison, in 2018, there were 19 different types of meetings and 18 different meeting types in 2017. So what this means is that the frequency of meetings for each meeting type is increasing. And that concludes my portion of this presentation. So unless there's any questions, I will turn it back over to Sky.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Here comes the fun one. The Snowgrove.
So thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to present today. The first topic that I'll be speaking to you about is the procedure bylaw amendments. So to provide a bit of background, Council Procedure Bylaw 2007 number 7060 was the previous procedure bylaw, which was adopted in 2007 and had 3 minor amendments. There was an identified need for an updated bylaw. The 2013 Governance Framework Report, known as the Watson Report, recommended updating the bylaw to address a number of deficiencies. Staff identified areas where clarity and improvement were needed and have received input from the public. Prior to adoption, a facilitated public engagement session was held in August 2018 with a registered parliamentarian. 30 members of the public attended and provided feedback and input on the new bylaw. And in November 2018, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272 became effective. So to provide an overview of the proposed amendments, so since adoption of Bylaw 7272, staff have identified a number of amendments that are necessary in order to streamline the administrative process related to meeting preparation and reflect Council's direction regarding the conclusion of the Committee of the Whole. So a summary of the significant changes are outlined in this presentation, and staff recommend that only these specific amendments be considered at this time. So the first amendment is to remove all references to the Committee of the Whole. Council has directed that all references to the Committee of the Whole be removed, and staff have amended the bylaw to reflect this direction. The Governance and Priorities Committee will be used instead in order for Council to have deeper discussion on topics of their
Councillor
interests.
Armstrong, do you want to ask the question?
Was there ever a motion to remove the Committee of the Whole? I don't recall that. I must have been away.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Armstrong, yes, there was an actual motion to dissolve the Committee of the Whole, and I think it was back in February, and it was to create the Governance and Priorities Committee and to dissolve the Committee of the Whole. So that motion passed, and staff brought forward the terms of reference and that were adopted for the Governance and Priorities Committee, and let Council know at that time that the actual Committee of the Whole could not be dissolved until an amendment to the bylaw was made, and that would be coming forward. So that is what initiated the amendment bylaw now before you.
So then the 2 hours that we're using with the cow, that will go to the GPC, or is it going to go to the council meeting?
So through you, Chair, the GPC was created by Council, I believe, to replace the Committee of the Whole in a different format and a new way of governance. You'll see later, and we do address delegations, because the main function of the Committee of the Whole It was meant to be changed with this new bylaw back that was adopted last year by council. It was meant to change, but never had fully begun that change. So the committee of the whole had been another version of a council meeting. However, the delegations unrelated to council agenda items were referred to the committee of the whole. But as Ms. Snellgrove will go over in a little bit, those delegations will now be referred to a council meeting, and there'll be twice as many opportunities as currently available for delegations to speak, and it will utilize the delegation heading that's already in the council agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as Ms. Gurry mentioned, delegations that are not related to agenda items will be directed to speak at council meetings instead of the committee of the whole, and there's a slide coming up that will touch on that further. So the second amendment is to add a definition of a task force. So this has been added to the bylaw, and task forces will be used to accomplish council-directed projects within a specific time frame. And task forces are treated like committees in many ways, and adding this definition to the bylaw legitimizes the processes already underway. Amendment number 3 is to change the in-camera council meeting start time. In-camera meetings are currently scheduled to start at 4 p.m. When meetings need to begin earlier or later, staff prepare a notice to change the time. The majority of meetings start at 4:30, so staff recommend changing the start time listed in the bylaw to 4:30. And this means that staff wouldn't need to prepare a notice each time the meeting starts at 4:30, and the table in the bottom left corner of your slide shows the average meeting start time. So amendment number 4 is adding a clause that no regular council meetings be held in August. So typically, Legislative Services cancels meetings held in August. This change aligns with the Regional District of Nanaimo's board meeting schedule. It allows for vacation time to be taken when senior staff don't have to miss a council meeting, and special meetings can still be held if required. Amendment number 5 is to change the agenda addendum publishing days. So currently, staff publish agendas Thursdays and addendums Monday afternoon for the Monday meeting. Staff are recommending that council meeting agendas be published on Wednesdays and addendums published on Fridays prior to the Monday meeting. This change gives staff time to prepare all meeting documentation, and the current practice of publishing addendums after 11 on Monday doesn't give staff much time to prepare, and council will have more time to review any additions to the addendum by receiving it on Friday. So amendment number 6 is to change the deadline for delegations related to items on agendas. So changing the delegation deadline to 11 a.m. on Fridays aligns with the addendum deadline change to 11 a.m. on Friday. With this change, delegations will be listed in the addendum, and late delegations would still be able to submit requests directly through to council. So amendment 7 is to change the process for delegations not related to agenda items. Currently, delegations unrelated to agenda items are directed to speak at a committee of the whole. Once the committee of the whole meetings are removed from the meeting cycle, delegations will be placed on council agendas under the delegations heading. Staff propose allowing a maximum of 4 delegations per meeting with a 5-minute time limitation. A limit of 4 delegations was determined by taking the average number of delegations currently at committee of the whole meetings, and delegation sign-up will be on a first-come, first-served basis. And the last change is that delegations from the same group or organization will be given 5 minutes to present. Amendment number 8, delegations speaking to consent items. Currently, there isn't a formal process when delegations want to speak to consent items. Staff propose the process where the item is removed from the consent items list. The consent items are considered excluding that item. The delegations speak, and then that consent item is voted on. This is the current process, and it seems to be working well. And sections have been added to the bylaw to prevent delegations from speaking on items that are personnel matters, solicitation of goods, or matters that are outside council's jurisdiction. So amendment 9 relates to consent items. So typically, changes to the financial plan and strategic plans are dealt with at the committee level. Committees then make recommendations to council, whose recommendations are included on the consent agenda. This amendment provides clarification that changes to the financial plan, annual municipal report, and strategic plan will be permitted under consent items, but the adoption of these items will not be considered. So amendment number 10 is related to committee delegation timelines. So there is no process for people who wish to appear as a delegation at committee meetings. With this amendment, the corporate officer will review delegation requests received for committees and place them on the most appropriate agenda. and requests must be received by 11 a.m. 10 days prior to the meeting.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. So just to be clear, if somebody would like to present to a specific committee, they would just submit online requesting that committee, and they would go directly to that committee without having to go through council.
Through the chair. So we have the delegation request form online that people are welcome to use, and then they'll be reviewed by the corporate officer, who will determine the most appropriate committee for them to go to.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Councillor Armstrong.
I just have a concern about the 10 days prior. I think that's too long. I refer to when I was chairing the community safety meeting, issues would arise and 10 days was too long to wait. You know, they would have to wait another 30 days before they'd get before the committee. So then we end up having all the delegations come into council and referring them back to the committee. I don't know if you recall that. So I have a concern about the 10 days when it's something that's like happening really fast in your community, that I think we should be looking at an exception on that.
This follows the same process that we had for committee of the whole delegations for unrelated items. So this timeline, if you wish to currently come to a committee of the whole to speak to an item that's not on a council agenda, you had to submit that delegation request and information 10 days prior to the meeting. It's in line with the reports as well that and presentations regarding items on the agenda that staff do. The other thing to note is that all of the committee and meetings have key date calendars that are set for the year ahead. So they do meet either monthly, and or the Health and Housing meets every 2 weeks. So it wouldn't be long before the next opportunity arose. And then there is always the ability for the chair to waive that decision and allow a late delegation to speak.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'm not sure who it goes to. I wonder if we could have a quick discussion about our process with regard to responding to delegation requests. We don't have in our procedure bylaw the item business arising from delegations, I don't believe, but we do have other business. So is that where something from a delegation might be discussed? How do we see us handling, say, a request from a delegation? They come and want money for some reason, and I'm sure it's a very good reason.
So, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Thorpe, it's not in the procedure bylaw. It is just a best practice or good governance to, as even Mr. Cuff said, listen and take it back to absorb, and don't make a decision on the fly when you have requests. We do funnel all money requests through finance and audit. Requests that sign up as a delegation staff normally look into it and try to be prepared to answer any questions that they might have, and or if it's for a financial ask, we route them to the finance and audit, and finance staff will have a look into it. We do suggest that you don't make any motions on the fly. And as for other business on the council agenda, its main purpose is for items that if council had an item, an emerging issue that it needed to speak to in an open council meeting, at the start of the meeting, under late items, council could bring up their item that they wish to discuss at that time, and then it would be put under other business. The agenda would be adopted as amended, and this is to, it's not encouraged to have a whole lot of items under other business because the public haven't had the opportunity to know that this will be on your agenda and to prepare to attend in knowing that it's on and wanting to be involved or be a part of it. So other business is really for those late items that council brings forward and not really intended for any other purpose.
Okay, thank you. And I personally absolutely agree with Mr. Cuff's advice about first heard, deferred. And I would hope that this council accepts a practice of doing that and either referring to staff for information or whatever is appropriate. But I guess my question was, when in the agenda would we deal with that? Immediately after the delegation has made their pitch? or later in the meeting, and I don't see a place later in the meeting to deal with it.
So yes, now I understand. I'm sorry. I understand
All right.
what you're saying. So if a delegation comes, speaks to you, and you hear it, you could refer to staff for a report, or you could ask staff to report back on this delegation at the next meeting. And yes, you could do so under other business, or it would actually be not inappropriate to deal with it right after hearing the delegation and not have to wait. So either or would be appropriate.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. That was kind of my question as well, because we've had delegations come to us, made asks, and then nothing really happened. Like they went away, we said thanks very much, and then it never appeared in finance and audit or anything. So I guess the question then is, if we do hear an ask in a presentation, then we would if we didn't do something in that meeting, then I would be tempted to tell them the next day, nothing happened. I'm guessing that's the case.
And as Councillor Thorpe was saying, first hear and then defer, or however that went, I would recommend that a standard or a good practice would be to always just refer it back to staff to then let you know the best way to proceed, especially if it's financial. We do try to route, and we have a tick box. Any financial requests have to go to finance and audit, and we do try to have staff be prepared with the implications so council is able to have that information at the time. But sometimes they do get around and we don't know about a financial ask, and they'll be here and asking you for money. So I would suggest that rather than making any motions on the fly that deal with budgetary items, et cetera, that you would refer it back to staff and have them come to the next meeting.
And I'm fine with that concept. I don't have a problem with that. So are you saying, so if someone comes to council and they have a request for funds in their delegation, you would actually say, don't come to council, come to the Finance and Audit Committee? Okay, so earlier this year, a known number did come to council, or COW at the time. So they should have actually gone to the other council. Okay, got it.
Councillor Armstrong.
This is the discussion why I actually prefer to keep the cow as well as a GPC, because then the cow just makes the recommendations to council, and we won't get ourselves in as much trouble, in my opinion. I think there's a need for all three, because the GPC is really just mostly about council and council business, whereas the cow is about citizens coming forward with their issues, their concerns, and then if we feel they're that critical, then they move on to council. So I think there's a need for all three myself. I think the cow is a very good purpose for the citizens. The GPC, I think, is a very good purpose for us as councillors, where we're getting down into the meat and gritty of stuff that a lot of people aren't interested in, so they don't want to come. Whereas I think the cow provided a really good opportunity for people to come and share their concerns around whether it be public safety, environment, whatever, like if there's no place for them to refer to. So I'm going to be voting against the amendment, because I would like to see the cow stay as well as a GPC. Thanks.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, a couple of points and questions. The first is just get really clear in my mind. A delegation comes to council, makes a request. After the delegation has presented, it is perfectly okay, and what council has agreed to make a motion to refer the request to Finance and Audit with a report for further discussion.
Your Worship, thank you. Through to Councillor Gesselbrock. Yes, that's correct. It would be perfectly appropriate. However, besides the one, and staff have been, we've even we follow up, et cetera, about financial asks. So we've been very diligent in making financial requests come to Finance and Audit, and that there is a recommendation to council, as Councillor Armstrong was saying. And the other reason, and good reason, I think, for having delegations unrelated to staff reports coming to a council meeting is that I think we've only had 5 committee of the whole meetings in 2019, and there was 7 total in 2018. So there is more opportunity, as we were saying earlier, for delegations to be able to come before you.
And to follow up on that, So at times, delegations can put forward a delegation request, and staff will immediately recognize that this is a request for funding, and they'll send it to finance and audit. Is there a vetting process that may inhibit a group from showing up at finance and audit for the case that it's just like, you know, we don't think that this is, you know, appropriate to ask for funding for this or whatnot?
Your Worship, there's very limited reasons where any delegation would be denied outside of jurisdiction and/or inappropriate personnel matters, legal issues, that sort of thing. But most every matter that comes in, I think we've only ever denied one or two. And then they even have the opportunity to appeal to you to overturn my decision to deny them. So there's not very many that come through that aren't legitimate requests, and those that would be legitimately not appropriate, I think we do have avenues to decline them.
Great. And my second question, sorry, Your Worship, is just a comment and question regarding Councillor Armstrong's concerns about the Committee of the Whole meeting. I do see that the Committee of the Whole function has been divided up, I think quite appropriately so, into what needs more in-depth council discussion happening at the governance and priorities, and then the function of being able to have public input directly into council being provided in the 4 delegation areas. Now, that is sort of mixing now a function of the public coming to council in with the regular council meetings, and is something that I think we do need to consider. Do we want to have that directness into, I believe there is different legislative powers that the council meeting has, and then having them there, we probably really need to trust that council will follow the first heard deferred in those meetings. But I do like that, one, the public has like twice as many opportunities to come speak directly to council. Before in the COW system it didn't, and I believe that council can be quite disciplined in how it's dealing with financial asks. But
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I think Councillor Gesselbrock covered it, but my read is that we're not reducing the ability of people to request to be a delegation. We're just moving it to a different meeting. We have a limit, but the data based on the previous year is showing that limit will be sufficient.
Yes, the data that we've collected, I believe, showed that there was an average of 4.8 per Committee of the Whole meeting, but as I said, we had 7 Committee of the Whole meetings in 2018, and we've had 5 so far this year, whereas we've had 3 or 4 times as many council meetings, and with them being able to come to every council meeting, it will actually be more opportunities.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I'm getting a little more confused as discussion goes on, so I just wanted to clarify that we're essentially doubling the amount of meetings that an individual in the community can come with a non-agenda item related delegation, correct?
I'm just going to ask Ms. Snellgrove for the one stat, because so it was 8 a month was one stat, and where was that stat
For
from?
Committee of the Whole meeting.
For 2018?
I believe it was 2018.
Okay, so there was 8 a month. So depending on how many council meetings we end up having, it will at least be the same, if not more.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Your Worship, with all due respect, most of those were me, so I'm not doing that anymore. So.
Someone is recording Councillor Bonner's words, correct? Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Ms. Snellgrove.
Thank you. So continuing on, the last amendment is related to the public hearing process. So currently, the procedure bylaw does not include any guidelines for public hearings. So the addition of the public hearing guidelines is listed in the report. Will provide some clarity for staff to follow and for the public. And we also anticipate bringing future amendments forward regarding public hearings at a future date. So bylaw, the next steps. So this is the recommendation in the report. So if the bylaw, if this recommendation passes, we'll be bringing the bylaw forward for 3 readings on October 7th. Then we'll provide public notice in accordance with the community charter. We'll bring the bylaw forward for adoption at the October 21st council meeting, and then it would become effective November 1st. So are there any questions?
And just to point out what Mr. Rudolph said earlier, if council does have some more work that they feel staff need to do on this bylaw, we can postpone this timeline. This is just best case scenario. You're all good with it. It's hunky-dory. We can go. However, we don't mind at all looking at any changes that you wish. But to keep in mind the logistics that I mentioned that are involved with the considerations we have to, as staff, take into place with the procedure bylaw of how it works logistically with all of the preparing of the agenda and the timelines, et cetera, as well as the community charter mandates that we have a key date calendar put in place by the end of December each year. And until this procedure bylaw amendment is adopted, if we have to do that key date calendar, it will include a calendar with committee of the whole meetings. So we'll have to go ahead and do a calendar with committee of the wholes for 2020 if this procedure bylaw isn't in place by then.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. Could we go back to amendment number 7, if I may? Now that we're done this part, right?
Through the chair, sorry, could you?
So your presentation's?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so
done, yeah.
now I'm going to ask questions. Okay,
Yes.
excellent. In terms of the process of when the agenda comes on is presented to us, and I think is that, or 5? I've gone lost on this. Oh, yes, sorry, 5. If we can go back to 5, please. Now, at this point, I like it from my point of view because I'm gaining a day in which I can look at the agenda. But I have an issue with the public because they're now losing a day. So they only now have basically less than 2 days in terms of hours to get their presentations ordered and to staff prior to the 11 o'clock cutoff on Friday. Is there anything that stops us from having just delegations able to start or able to continue until Monday at 11, at which point you would just have an addendum of delegations, and if there weren't any, we wouldn't?
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. So there would be no problem if that was what council wanted, we could do that. The reason for this adjustment goes back to prior to the new bylaw. The old bylaw had the addendum done by 11 on Friday, and the rationale back then, and that we were leaning towards going back to, was Mondays preparing an addendum has been a logistical challenge. Staff have had a really hard time preparing the addendum and preparing for the meeting, so there's a lot of work that goes into both. And so to reduce errors and to have council more time to have the full agenda in front of them, know which delegations are coming, we were going to resort back to the Friday. The only other issue with your suggestion, everything but delegations on the Monday, I think would be 2 addendums then, because if there were other late items, we'd have to have those out by the Friday, and then delegations on the Monday, so we might be doubling up our work if we kept the Friday for everything else but delegations. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
It sort of does, but I'm not sure the work that goes in when a delegation shows up. But from what I see on the agenda, it's just a name and, the item that they're speaking under.
Yeah.
And they either give you a presentation or they don't give you one. It just, this bylaw is probably the most important bylaw that council has. It's how we talk to how we allow the public to deal with us and how we run our business here. And for the public to lose a day and be able to make presentations, I think it's probably not the best thing. I mean, if there's any way we can leave it to the Monday, I'd be fine with that. That's something, I don't know what other people think about it.
I'm going to go to the next speaker on the list, and we can have a more fulsome discussion in a minute. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Specifically on the item that Councillor Bonner is describing, One, some clarification. Is this for agenda items that are already present on the agenda, and to have a delegation speak to them and have the cutoff point be either we're choosing between Friday, which is being proposed, or extending it to Monday?
Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yes, so this is for delegations related to agenda items.
Okay, excellent. So to that point, the general public is not as versed with the procedure bylaw and the timing of things. And I know from past lives, experience of that, normally the agenda comes out, there is the agenda watchers that see something. That information gets onto Facebook, wherever becomes more prevalent. Thursday, Friday, people who actually know something about the issue get wind of it. It's Saturday, and do a little preparation, and then come on Monday. And I think that we do really need to give the public that amount of time to be able to get on the agenda if it is something that's important. So I would like to see an amendment to allow it for Monday. The second point too is 5 minutes for a presentation is quite short, and I think that it is necessary and people can be concise. And I know it is a bit of a thorn for people wanting to present. They feel that they can't get their full information to council. I'm curious if we're able to communicate and advise delegations that are making this request when they hear the new rule that they can't have 3 spots anymore, but to let them know that they can give a much more in-depth presentation that can be sent to mayor and council as part of the delegation package that we can read through, and let them know it's much more effective that way anyhow than them speaking to it, to alleviate, I know, some of the backlash that we'll probably get on this. That's the other point.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Council Gesserbrock. That wouldn't be a problem at all. We already do inform all of our delegation that sign up about the 5-minute limit. Like, it's a very in-depth, step-by-step process that we send them in reply to their delegation requests. So there's no problem. We could completely do that with a presentation. And as for the publishing of the addendum day, I would suggest when you deal with the recommendation and the motion that's in the staff report, you could amend it to include that change and then vote on the amendment.
Councillor Armstrong.
I just need one more point of clarification, because I think I'm confused. So when a cow is normally scheduled, that's going to be replaced by a council meeting?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
So when we normally had a cow scheduled, like it goes council, then cow, council, cow, those cows will be replaced by a council meeting?
So council meetings will be held on the first and third Mondays of the month.
So then we're actually losing time for people to come speak to us, because we still have our GPC, so we've lost all the ability of the council. So we're not gaining meetings, we're losing.
So through the chair, there was previously only one committee of the whole meeting a month, and now there are 2 council meetings where delegations can come speak to council.
So then we are replacing that. If we only had one council meeting before, we're replacing the cow then with a council meeting.
Technically, yes, I guess you could say yes.
Because I
we're
think the
having
numbers
2 council
decrease.
meetings
I think
instead
there's-
of the one committee of the whole meeting.
When I did my math, unless I did it wrong, if there's less opportunity, there's not more.
So just to further to what Ms. Snellgrove was saying, we were having just one committee of the whole meeting a month, and a lot of them get changed for whatever reason. We still do add delegations, but she said we were having one committee of the whole per month. Now delegations unrelated to a council agenda item will have the first and third Monday council meeting to come to speak, instead of just the one committee of the whole opportunity.
Yeah, they still used to come.
I'm going to go to the next speaker, but
Thank you.
I'm a bit concerned that perhaps we're creating a problem where none exists, because we're getting lost in the numbers here and how much time is actually involved and who comes. And I'd hate to think we'd be amending or proposing to amend the good work of staff if in fact it's based on the fact that we don't necessarily understand that this is not a decrease as I understand it, but perhaps I'm wrong. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. To amendment number 5, I just want to express my support. I'm always thinking of how people in my life circumstances can do work with council, and getting our agendas late on Thursday afternoon, if I have a full day of meetings on Friday, which I often do, or if I have another job, that means that I'm working on the weekends. And so a change of this nature, I think, opens this up for people with with families, et cetera, or have another job to do this work more effectively. Regarding the delegations, I understand this, that we're moving notification up of the agendas by 1 day. So moving the delegation opportunity from Monday to Friday is not completely out of the realm of possible. I also hear that staff are saying that doing an addendum and then an addendum on Friday and then a second addendum on Monday is probably going to complicate what we're actually trying to streamline. And I have a question. When someone submits to be a delegation, do they have to have their whole presentation ready? Or can they just say, I'd like to be a delegation on item 8A, and then take the weekend to do their presentation, and then come to us on Monday with all of that? Or do they have to have that all prepared by Friday?
So, thank you through the chair. So, the delegation deadline, yes, we receive their delegation request, and then we'll respond letting them know when the presentation deadline is.
And when is that
on the
presentation?
Monday at 11.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the presentation deadline isn't changing. So people still have the weekend to work on it.
I think the presentation deadline would change as well, so that we have all of the documentation that we need for the addendum for 11 a.m. on Friday.
The problem that staff have had, just to interject here, is that the number of presentations. So delegations will sign up with presentations. Staff have to review those presentations for content. We have to make sure there's no copyright issues, that there's nothing inappropriate, that they're formatted for the screen here. And we, a long time ago, had to stop the practice of allowing USBs to come right to the meeting because of virus issues and stuff. So the amount of presentations that we have received, as well as the other addendum items, have made it a hard day on Monday for staff. However, we work for you, so if you want your delegations to come on Monday, we'll work around it. But the purpose behind this amendment was to allow council that extra day. We have been listening, so an extra day for you to prepare for your meeting on Monday by making the publishing day Wednesday. However, that was bumping that up a day, and we were hoping to bump the delegation to the Friday rather than the Monday to ease the pressures on staff for the Monday. However, we have been doing it for almost a year. It has been a bit challenging, and we hope you're forgiving of errors that might occur on the agenda, but that is the intention behind it, was just to try to make it easier for staff. And the one other thing, though, if council does move to change the date to Monday, I would suggest that the addendum be on Monday as well, and not do 2 addendums on Friday for the regular agenda and Monday for delegations. I would suggest just doing 1 addendum on the Monday back to what it is right now.
May I follow? Thank you. I think we've had a number of instances during our term where we've maybe made a decision and had to backtrack. And I think this might be one of those times. I'm in support of this. And I would just like to state that, if we go to a Friday deadline and it doesn't work, then we can change it, right? Yeah.
Just further to that point, the Friday was a change in October. It became effective November 1st, 2018. So previous to that, it had been Mondays. It had been Fridays. And then we changed it last November, effective November 1st, to Mondays. So for years before last October, it had been a Friday cutoff. And the Monday was a change because we bumped ahead the publishing date of the Thursday. So we were trying to allow more time, and for the last year, we've attempted the Monday as the delegation cutoff, and we've noticed some issues. However, they're not, we can overcome them, but we are suggesting the Friday for that reason.
Councillor Councillor Bonner hit himself, so sorry, but you're...
I think Councillor Brown has because I have a question on something else.
All right, well, Councillor Thorpe then, in order.
Thanks, Your Worship, through you. I guess just in general terms, and I think Councillor Hemmons hit the point, and that is that that if we feel further modifications to our bylaw are necessary, we can also look at those down the road. We haven't talked about question period at all, and I know Councillor Brown is eager to do that. If I'm not. But aside from that, I think it's important in general terms that we move ahead with the changes that we need to, or that we're considering making, and see how they go. And on this particular item, I will support, I know there's no motion on the floor right now, but I support this amendment. I like the idea of Friday. To me, it's much more streamlined for staff. It's better for council, and I know we're concerned about citizens, and I appreciate that. I don't feel that they're losing any business days in terms of being able to put together presentations, and I think we should try this, and if we do get feedback on it, then we can always look at it again. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just to begin, I am absolutely supportive of moving the one day earlier in the week. And I get what you're saying, Councillor Bonner, and I initially thought I was in support of it, but sort of just reflecting on it here, I don't think the issue is necessarily the amount of days. It's so the council watchers are going to be reading the agenda no matter which day of the week it's released and flag any items that are important to them. For me, the concern lies with those that might not be well versed in that, and I don't think the change in timeline actually impacts them at all. The same problem still emerges. There's a decisions will be made that impact people that they have an opinion of, and the decision's already done. You know, for example, I think we all learned a good lesson there with the recent parking amendment proposals, but I think an even a better example is the Opal Road closure. So, you know, on our agenda, we passed it. As it hit the newspaper, we received some feedback, and then as the work's done, we received a lot more feedback months after the decision had been made. So thinking about whether this timeline here would have affected that at all, I think the answer is no. The heart of the issue isn't addressed, and I don't think this is attempting to address that. So I will be supportive of these amendments, but I think we need to maybe give some thought over the course of our term about how we can better inform people of decisions that they will be concerned about. But they just don't have the time living their busy lives to read our agendas, whether it's released on a Wednesday or a Thursday.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to staff, I'm just curious, since the change, because before it was Friday, and then we've changed it to Monday, what has been the response and feedback? Are more people getting their presentations in and appearing? Are you getting less people angry? I think I remember in the past sending an email to Legislative Services that I was not allowed to bring my stick in to get a presentation on Monday. That was very graciously received and responded by our wonderful staff. But are you receiving less of that because, in fact, it is now Monday?
I'm actually going to see if Skye wants to answer that, because her and the Stanos deal a lot more with that on a hands-on basis than I do.
Thank you. So through the chair, we haven't done a specific comparison, but delegations will take up until when we give them to get their presentations into us. So if we let them have 11 a.m. on Monday, we'll get them at 10:59 on Monday. And if we bring it back to Friday, we'll get them on Friday, I think. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would agree with that. And I think if we go to having delegations able to appear twice, you're not waiting a whole month before you can reappear at the COW. That will take a bit of the anxiety off that you've missed your shot to make your statement. But I do experientially, have memories on this and know that it can be helpful to have a bit longer of a deadline. Thank you.
Before I go to Mr. Rudolph, I would remind everybody that it's not as if, given the previous presentations, we are isolated from our constituents. They continue to email, phone. For those of you who participate in social media, which I don't, you have every opportunity to hear from them. What we are talking about is trying to run relatively efficient meetings on important topics that should not be discussed easily or passed over lightly, but should be the subject of consideration and preparation. And that is the idea of a council meeting. So I much appreciate the concerns of everyone around whether delegate times are being reduced, increased, et cetera, delegation times, and that's certainly a person's opportunity to speak to the community at large. But as I remind everyone of the sage words of Gary Corp, and there are no such thing as emergencies in municipal politics. Now, an emergency is when the dam's about to burst. That's a real emergency, and we're not going to save that at a council meeting. But the other topics are generally speaking ongoing, but I don't want to influence anyone in this. I'm glad we're having this fulsome discussion. Mr. Rudolph.
Your Worship, I haven't actually mentioned this to the Legislative Services Department, which makes them nervous, but I was just wondering, maybe we could diarize a check-in back to Council in 6 months or something like that on the success of these bylaw changes, and just instead of wondering how to get it back if there was an issue, just sort of say, we'll check in 6 months, we'll make that promise. You could either give us a motion to that effect or something, so that you know that there will be a time, and if there's even something in the shorter term that you need to revisit, that's certainly always possible. So that would probably be one way to solve this a little bit, is just, okay, we're going to try these changes, and if there's some adjustments, we would diarize to come back in whatever time frame you feel is appropriate. I'll just say 6 months. That probably gives us enough time to see if it's working or not. The other piece is around engagement, and at the beginning of this, we outlined we're more engaged as an organization, as a council, than ever before. And so there's, we've got a lot of task forces ramping up this fall. We've got, there is a change with the community as a whole, but I understand, my understanding is that if you wanted to be not related to an item on an agenda delegation, just simply a delegation, you were directed to committee of the whole. Now you're not, and you weren't allowed to really go directly to a council meeting. You had to go to committee of the whole. What we're saying with this change is that you will be authorized up to a maximum of 4 delegations for every council meeting. So you're actually creating more space for the delegations not related to topics directly on an agenda. So there's actually doubling those number of meeting opportunities in a month. Is that saying it in a way that makes sense? Okay.
That's my roots showing.
Mr. Rudolph, I appreciate that very much. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. And I'd like to put forward my appreciation for, council moving this to a GPC, because I did have a lot of questions. And I'll also let you know that I've pared them down considerably over the last month. I haven't gone through things. A couple of minor questions is, one of the mentions in the changes is that delegates from the same organization will get 5 minutes together. How do we figure that out? Do they self-identify, or do they just come in as part 1, part 2 delegation?
They would have to self-identify. Sometimes it's not obvious until they're here, and that is a loophole that we're trying to close, because that has happened where a group or an organization has come and it's 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, whereas if you're going to be succinct and clear, we think 5 minutes per group would suffice, and I think that's been council's preference. So that is a loophole this is trying to identify and close. However, I'm sure there'll be workarounds.
There was none of the other additions around that topic was the limit of 10 pages per handout. Has that ever been a problem in the past? I've never seen that before.
Through the chair, yes. So we receive a number of pages of handouts, so we're trying to limit the amount that we receive to make it concise and so that the delegation's points are clearly laid out.
Okay, thanks.
Wasn't it President Reagan who was famous for demanding that all be reduced to 1 page? And if you couldn't reduce to 1 page, it wasn't worth talking about. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question on process. Do we move the recommendations after each segment of the presentations, or are we going to wait till all the presentations are done and then fire through the recommendations?
Go ahead,
Thank you,
Ms.
Chair,
Gray.
sorry. I was going to recommend that this is the first, the procedure bylaw was the first report of your agenda, and there is a recommendation. So I would suggest we would deal with that now before moving forward to the next item, and then have the presentation deal with the next item, et cetera.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Brown, discussion? Councillor Bonner's there first.
Thank you, Worship. I have only, these are kind of little minor things that mostly housekeeping than anything else. One of the recommendations is that committees and/or task forces don't have meetings by electronic means, but we've already done that twice, or not, 3 times at the task force. Just because the people who make up this committee sometimes just can't get into town because some of them don't even live here. So is that going to be an issue if we make that change? And I'll just go quickly through the other two. In 51.2, the following persons may take minutes of a meeting. They just list the corporate officer, the recording secretary, but don't we also have the option of assigning someone to take minutes, especially if we're in a in-camera meeting?
Yes, in a closed meeting via motion resolution, you can do that, and nothing prohibits that, even though it's not in the procedure bylaw. However, because of process, it is a recommendation, good governance, that be recorded in the procedure bylaw, but you are correct, so.
And let's see, I've done some research on votes on motions, and a lot of the research I say, if the vote isn't unanimous, then they record both the for and the against. I know we just do the against. Is that standard? It just makes it a little bit harder when you're going through, say, a bunch of in-camera minutes, finding out who actually was at the meeting and who did vote in favor.
So I will have to look into that to verify, and I could, but I believe it's in the community charter. So in the charter, under meeting procedures, it shows how each one of you has one vote, and that those opposed must be recorded. So I believe it actually comes from the community charter.
Okay, well, we'll change that next week, okay?
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I'm in support of the new bylaw amendments, although a little concerned about the Monday deadline being moved to Friday. I'm not prepared to lie across the road for this, and I appreciate the perspective of just looking to see, and if there's feedback that people are really upset and it's limiting access to the community, which we always need to hold that as a very important principle, we can change it. And if this is going to make things more efficient in our shop, we're going to be running a lean, mean fighting machine here. So this is great. Thank you.
I'm tempted to comment, Councillor Gesselbrock, given your strong desire on bicycling, I suppose that's one of the reasons you want us on bicycles, so you can lie across the road and you won't be hurt when you roll over. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. A point of clarification. We have a motion on the floor. Can I have, so on my agenda, I'm still in the presentation. So where?
Procedure bylaw amendments.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
We haven't got to the agendas committee yet.
Page 41. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Thank you. And I want to thank staff for the work that they put into this before we call the vote on. All those in favor? Contrary? Carries. Well done. Thank you. The next item, item 5A4, is the Agendas Committee.
So thank you, Your Worship.
May I suggest we take a 5-minute break so we can get some coffee? I'm not sure about the rest of you, but
That sounds
after
great.
UBCM last week and a busy weekend, as a modest caffeine drinker, I feel the need myself. Thank you.
beautiful photos, so we're,
Thank you very much. I understand we are recording, so
Hold on. I'm gonna raise my seat so I look like I'm 6'6".
no, I'm just,
Boom, yeah.
it's so
Travis, everybody from the ICC.
Awesome. Oh, he got in, Travis.
Okay.
Travis and, that was
Oh, my vote's
Claire.
got in Claire. She got in.
She's the most confident of a lot.
She's from Campbell River? Yeah, she's great.
I was going to say, for the audience at home, so to speak, we are about to try and take a photograph, which explains why we're not doing anything useful at this particular moment.
Can I get everyone's attention over here for a sec? 1, 2, 3. One more. And then if you all can come out and stand
So demanding.
right by the curb. Leave the thing.
I listen to Leonard too much.
Oh, come on, Cheryl. What are we doing?
We're all standing behind Cheryl. You can screen Cheryl in like that.
Oh, wait.
Just, yeah, sit your hand, get your hand in front. Disembodied arm.
Okay. Don't want anyone criticizing you.
I don't care.
Okay. One more. Thank you.
Cheryl will be the one criticizing the rest of us.
Huh?
You'll be criticizing the rest of us.
I care less if I get criticized.
So after you.
Ms. Gurry, back on the agenda. Agendas Committee, please.
Thank you, Worship. So the report that was included for information in your agenda outlines the types of items contained in a council agenda, as well as the finance and audit agenda, and they are highlighted on this slide. So these are some of the types of items that council and/or the Finance and Audit Committee review and consider at their meetings. So their committee recommendations, legislated items with specified time frame, reports requested by council, emerging issues of a not urgent matter, etc. For Finance and Audit agendas, it's increased to project budgets, funding requests, or other city projects, and a lot of these things are time sensitive because of the budget requirements. The Agendas Committee continued some potential challenges. So they would, having an Agendas Committee, staff believe, would overlap responsibilities between the Agenda Committee and the Governance and Priorities Committee. The Governance and Priorities Committee is required to act as an advisory to Council by discussing and considering all governance issues prior to being placed before a Council agenda. And the legislative and administrative requirements of committees would apply and result in a backlog of reports and unnecessary delays. So it's outlined a little bit further or in depth in your report, but basically all committees have no authority to act and must be forwarded to council for with their recommendations. So only council has the authority under the community charter to actually act, and all committees, task force, etc., those recommendations have to go to council for approval. So an agendas committee, I think, would have the opposite effect to what I think council was hoping for, whereas it would create a backlog of reports and a layer of, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy, that I think would have the opposite effect to what I think you're trying to achieve. So again, just to throw in the council agenda cycle from earlier, this just outlines all of the steps that go into preparing an agenda. An agendas committee would have an agenda, and informally, staff can't take direction directly from a council member. And another downside or challenge to having an agendas committee is the limited membership, whereas if we continue and improve and enhance what you've just started to do at the Governance and Priorities Committee by the last 15 minutes reviewing the topics, adding topics of your choice via motion, deciding on what topics that you would like to discuss and at what date, and adjusting the agendas that way for governance and priorities, I think would, A, have all of you there and not just a limited number, moving the agenda in the way you wish to have, cut down on that level of bureaucracy that unfortunately is needed with any kind of a committee that doesn't have the powers and functions of a council, and I think gives you the outcome that you were looking for. So that is the recommendation from staff, and it's just an information report. However, any motion that you make, we could attempt to deal with it here, but it's just to continue to review the list of potential topics for discussion at each GPC meeting. Items not on the list can be addressed by the GPC via motion, and the recommendations can be made regarding the order of topics and the corresponding meeting dates. So, as I just said, all the members sit on the GPC, and this allows all of council to participate in the discussion regarding issues that they would like to see come forward.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you, Worship. Through you to staff, I agree entirely with this analysis of the Agendas Committee, as presented, and I think that it would layer another level of hassle on a process for sure. I'm really appreciative of the emergence of that spot for the Governance and Priorities Committee to review, upcoming options, and I look forward to Council having a bit more in-depth discussion on that to sort of foresee what we need to be doing down the line. With the Agendas Committee, I think my initial reasonings for it is that I was feeling there was a bit of a gap in how emerging issues was getting onto the agenda. There was a lot of confusion around it amongst council members, and issues with notices of motion and just frustrations that things that needed to be addressed weren't being discussed. And I think that still there's a need for a bit more pre-discussion sometimes around things to get ahead of the agenda almost, in a more informal area. And I know as soon as it becomes a committee, it puts on a whole nother layer. One area where the discussion is happening is on the Monday meeting around the agenda before the council meeting. And I'm curious if a little bit more structure can be placed on that so the discussions that need to be happen can happen, and a bit of policy around who's in attendance of that, and the rotation through with the deputy mayor and then the next person in line in attendance, and also to an issue I think for council, as especially with a lot of us new, is becoming more aware operationally of where the workflow is and what is coming next 2 weeks out, so that we can organize ourselves appropriately. And I think that information is difficult to transmit. We do have opportunity with the CAO and the council CAO matters to have that, but a lot of the times things can appear on the agenda on a Wednesday that we've got to deal with, and they come out of the blue. For example, there was that one item about the consumption site, which was quite a large item, and it created a lot of conversation and media around that, and there's a lot of implications, and that kind of appeared out of the blue. And I think I would like to avoid those situations and see when something's coming down the pipes. And what I'm curious is that, given that there's a draft agenda that comes out 12 days prior, would it be possible to, and I by no means want to interfere with a process, because I know it can get tricky when you all of a sudden have, 8 councillors looking at something when it's way before it needs to happen. It could create more of a mess. To be able to have see a bit of that information, so that we as a councillor can look over with a political lens, and then also when we're thinking about putting motions forward and that, we can gauge the proper timing, because really timing is everything. And either the agenda item could be coming up in 2 weeks and we can relax around it, or there might be something on there that can change what we're planning. And so these are just some of the ideas to formulate to try to adjust the gaps without having to make a separate agendas committee.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Gesselbrock. Mr. Rudolph and I have discussed this as well, and if you look at the slide I've just put up there, the third one over, staff review on Wednesday, 12 days prior to the meeting, with the draft agendas, and they're very draft for the meeting that is 2 weeks ahead, as the reports were just due the day before. So it's really rough, and it's really at the operational stage. However, council could see, or could the mayor, acting mayor, and the next acting mayor could possibly attend these meetings just for a heads up, or staff could give you a list that we have when we prepare our agendas. My staff have a list of meeting items coming up that we could provide. We could find some way, and we will continue to work on a way to accommodate those issues, because I do understand them. However, the one thing that I want to avoid, and which is the information I provided in the report, about a committee or about having a certain group, especially a majority of council, meeting together at the same time, furthering the business or deciding the business of council. That's where we get into trouble. So if it was just to listen or watch us review the agendas, or I think maybe better would be to get a list of the upcoming items that we have, though they do change, like reports get pulled or staff aren't ready, but we could provide you some further advanced material. I think we could work harder to get that for you, because the cycle does start quite a bit in advance. We could probably at least give you more information than you currently have. And then the meetings on Monday that we review that day's agenda with the mayor is just a review. So we just go through the agenda and talk about the items that are on the agenda with the mayor, the acting mayor, and we could extend or make that meeting a little bit more people there. However, again, it would just be to review what items are currently on the agenda and not to change the direction or make decisions that all of council hasn't been involved in.
Mm-hmm. So just to follow up on that, extending that meeting to have a quick look at the draft agenda would not be appropriate. Like as a function, to expand that function of that little pre-meeting to be able to just have council, have those members of council and the mayor to have a quick look at what's coming down the pipe, so that there is a bit more operational awareness on when the discussions do happen with the mayor and CAO around new motions that could potentially coming forward. Because I know we are changing our notice of motion. Well, not changing it, but we've got a policy that if you got a notice of motion, it is good to check in with the mayor and the CAO to get an idea operationally what is going on in the city and where this could fit. And that information of, the workflow is important information to gauge how that notice of motion and that the new motion does play out. And so that's what I was just curious about.
If I may, Ms. Gurry, and I appreciate Councillor Gesselbrock's concern around this. That was no Freudian slip. It's Councillor Bonner who's next. And I understand what you're driving at, but the risk of that road is that there will be the usual presumption that some councillors who manage to attend the meeting that they really don't have to attend but chose to will somehow have more influence on the agenda or whatever than the other councillors who did attend and so on. And I think the potential benefit would lead arguably to fracturing of council unnecessarily, and the sense that some are more in the know than others, as opposed to what frankly has been proposed and what we've approved today to be carried on to the next council meeting for approval for first reading is the procedures bylaw. I mean, I think things are well in hand, and if ever Mr. Rudolph's council and Ms. Gurry's council and staff's council around this is even more important, is that, we can go back and redo this. But I think that it just raises a risk. I love to tell this old story that let's just say it was a well-known and beloved previous mayor who was supposed to attend the staff briefing on Monday mornings in the old days, and Councillor Strongerthorn reported to me that that mayor was not necessarily present all the time. She generally went, but the only councillor who did go was Councillor Kennedy, who was a first-rate city councillor. This was before the days of Lloyd Sherry. And if it was, I can assure you Councillor Sherry was probably there too, within reason. But we're a modern council, and I just think that we need to be conscious of that, as much as I appreciate your concerns. Sorry for jumping in. Got to pull rank once in a tiny moon, and we have lots of other speakers who may well be agreeing with you and disagreeing with me. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. To me, I never thought that the Agendas Committee was going to be doing agendas for council meetings. Like, the last thing you want is me working on that stuff. To me, the Agendas Committee came out of a discussion with Mr. Cuff regarding where we want to see the GPC over the next period of months, so that the Agendas Committee would sit down and say, we need to have a really wholesome conversation on, transportation. And so we set it up for November of next year, which then gives everybody in the world a chance to prepare for that meeting and make presentations and that sort of thing. To me, that was what the Agendas Committee was. It wasn't to do the agendas for council meetings or anything else. That was literally it for me. Thanks.
Just to respond to that or add to that, and I believe what you've just started and could evolve into is just what you're saying. So, and all of you would be able to participate and have that discussion. So if it's 15 minutes at the end of each GPC committee meeting where you bring up, I would really like to see a great workshop and discussion around transportation, and you set it for November, and all of you agree to that or say, yeah, that's what I want to hear. I think that's exactly what I think was envisioned and what could be without the hiccups or the bureaucracy that comes around an actual committee. And Mr. Cuff, he's renowned and across Canada, but there is specific legislation in the Charter for BC that kind of handcuffs us and I think adds layers to council's motives, like layers that they don't wish to be there, that I think would be there if they were to go with a committee.
We move within the straitjacket we were given. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I appreciate this report from Ms. Gurry, and I certainly agree with the recommendations. I just wanted to speak briefly to the Monday morning Mayor, CAO, Acting Mayor, Ms. Gurry agenda briefings. And I have been attending those, not always, but possibly every second one. And that is something I will not be doing in future, and I feel that maybe caused some confusion or concern. It was at the mayor's invitation, as he often refers to me, the longest-serving council member, when topics were on the agenda that new councillors would not have a background on, files that even the mayor or Mr. Rudolph might have not have information on that I could provide. So for that reason, I was attending occasionally, and we've been here a year now, and I don't think that's necessary anymore, so I will not be attending, but I appreciated the invitation. Thank you.
I was going to say, I've never heard someone so gracefully withdraw having to attend a meeting in my whole life. Thank you. Mr. Rudolph.
Yes, Your Worship, I was back in responding to Councillor Gesselbrook's commentary about the Agendas Committee, and I think a lot's been said. Even at the administrative level, there's a lot of improvement that we can still make in terms of getting things in the queue and knowing sooner. A lot of reports seem to appear on my desk at the very last minute. I received 8 reports last Friday at 4:30, which really I don't like to receive. And some of them are bigger ones, but that have to go back. So I think it's part of the challenge has been the administration has been running fast. I've heard the clerk's department say that we are a fast operation. We are turning around a lot of stuff. We have agendas every week. So there's been a lot of work going on just to keep it going. And, you know, it was the busiest development year on record and so forth. There's been a lot of pieces there, but what I'd like to see us do is, if there are significant issues coming forward where there needs to be more of an informal setting for it, or at least a briefing session, that the GPC is the place to do that. So if we can get some of these larger items first on the agenda for GPC, so you get the thorough briefing, then that's good. The second piece is, what Mr. Cuff was really getting at was council having what it feels is sufficient say in the building agendas for GPC. And I'm not sure we're there yet. I think we have an opportunity at the end of each meeting, but maybe we just need a session before next year, let's say, where we're sitting down, spending a whole afternoon with council and GPC and saying, throughout the year, these are the broad range of topics that we could start to allocate time towards, and let council drive that as well, as staff bringing stuff forward. So there's opportunity for improvement. I think GPC is a great place to unpack topics so that, as they're coming, that might have started in the last term. There were examples of home-based business. There was the plastic bag thing. There's been a number of these things that are significant topics, and I think the great place to do that is in GPC. And before you get it at a council meeting and you're not sure that you've had a chance to ask all your questions. So internally, we need to find a way to get things done earlier. So it's, I'll be honest, last year we did have some of these pre-meetings with the previous deputy mayor and council or the councillor, and it didn't go well because there was a lack of information on a lot of items, and it just wasn't ready. So it was very preliminary, and so we felt we needed to back off that because we weren't really ready to do that. Because the expectation is that it was all scripted well and it was very thoroughly prepared and so on, and we weren't able to do that in another 2 weeks in advance. So I don't think we could live up to your expectations necessarily, but what you're really asking for are the major issues, not necessarily all the issues. And I think that's a fair comment, and we need to direct as many of those as possible to GPC, I think, and to give you the heads up. And in addition, I do think that you need to take advantage of the opportunity at GPC to put any item that's on your mind on the table. That probably would reduce the number of notices of motion, which is the next topic, but doesn't have to. And just to get that communication going and flowing there. So it's all a work in progress. We're only almost 1 year into your mandate, and there's been a lot of procedural change take place, and stability and predictability is really important for everybody. That piece is not only to you, but to the general public. Predictability, so things just don't spring up. And so if we can do that in a way, because this is important governance work that you do, then I think we're serving everybody's needs if we are predictable, and we can project out as far as possible GPC and other major items. So I think we're not perfect, and we're trying to get better.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say to Councillor Geselbrecht for that safe consumption site, if you're not comfortable, you can always request a deferral or referral. And we've done that in the past, where I know I made one where I did not have enough information and just requested it, and then we voted on it that way. So that option's always available.
Thanks very much. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I definitely understand where Councillor Geselbrecht is coming from, in the sense of sort of wanting to peer around the corner a little bit and know what's coming at us. And I don't think that, I think Mr. Rudolph, you sort of touched on it, we don't need to know all the nitty-gritties, but sometimes it is nice to know on particular topics of importance, or if they're important to even individuals, just how many months away until we deal with it, because there is pressures that come from elsewhere, not just at the council table. With that said, I do think there is an opportunity for better lines of communication around that type of stuff, but I think what we've embarked on with the GPC, although it may just seem like a committee name change, I think it's fundamentally a lot more than that, and we're still working out a lot of the details, and it's not easy to find anywhere else that has attempted to do, I think, what we're trying to do. And so there will be failures and things that don't work, and I was fairly convinced the agenda committees was the way to go, but I think there's a better opportunity, whether it's the 10, 15-minute check-in at each GPC or a whole session from time to time to do agenda planning, at least rough out a framework for the entire year. I think that's what probably would make more sense, and then what you would get out of that that's not necessarily you wouldn't get from agendas committee is that council dialogue about actually picking what are the important issues. And so I do think this is probably the better way to go. I just apologize for wasting staff time having to come back to us with, don't do an agendas committee. And I do agree with Councillor Armstrong, and I think it's a tool that in the heat of the moment we often forget about, is our ability to refer an item to the GPC if we need to unpack policy as a council, or as we have task forces and committees where that work is more rightly done there, to make a recommendation to council. And it's so easy to forget that when the debate is hot and there's people in the gallery, but that is a tool we always have, and we should probably utilize it more when we're not feeling like the comfort level is there to make a decision. That's really all I'd have to say. I support what staff came back with. I appreciate the thought. And I just spoke one more item is I think we're all still learning our comfort level at the GPC, to have that more robust debate, to feel like we don't need to make decisions. And I think probably staff are learning that comfort level too, that we want their input in maybe a manner that's not typically present in a lot of committees. We want outside experts to participate in dialogue with us. We want staff to participate in dialogue that's not as formal as what it is in a setting like this. So I think it's an evolving process that we are going to get more comfortable with, staff will get more comfortable with, and hopefully the community and outside perspectives will become more comfortable with time.
Councillor Brown, if I might say, that was very eloquent, and it points out what our job is, though. Our job was, as we got elected, was to question. And if it does create work for staff without question as well. But on the other hand, if we arrive at answers that satisfy us as councillors in our responsible position as councillors, then the whole process has worked very well, I think. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to echo those comments. I'm looking forward to building out sort of our ability to use the process of the GPC and that tail end of the meeting there to discuss agenda planning. I also would like to thank the legislative staff on the report on the agenda cycle and really looking at it and coming back with a recommendation that I think is very sound. Even though it may be counter to what initially was thought, I think, this council's open mind, and it's really nice to just see that, we're all working as a team to refine our processes, and it's just exciting that we're able to take on this innovative new GPC structure, and it may be clunky at the beginning, but we're troubleshooting to do it, and that's an adaptive system. So thank you very much.
I think even Mr. Cuff would be impressed with the staff's handling of this matter. We don't need a motion to receive that report. Thank you very much. The next presentation is the Notice of Motion Policy. Ms. Gurry, Ms. Snellgrove.
Yes, I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Snellgrove, but I am going to probably participate in this one as well.
Okay, so thank you. Today I'll be speaking about the Notice of Motion Policy. So it's a draft policy being brought forward for Council's consideration. So a notice of motion is a parliamentary tool used to introduce a motion. Bylaw 7272 outlines the process to follow at a meeting. This policy is intended to be used prior to introduction of a motion at a meeting. The focus is on pre-meeting preparation, and the policy outlines the role of council, the city clerk, and city staff. So I'll go through this slide here. So in the top box, you can see that the member of council identifies the topic, the desired outcome, the relationship of their motion to the strategic plan, and drafts the resolution. The second box, the city clerk, adjusts the wording if required, discusses changes with the council member, and determines the appropriate meeting date to bring the notice of motion forward. Then the member of council at the meeting refers back to staff for a report to determine possible implications. And after that, city staff bring a staff report back to council, and then council would vote on the proposed resolution after receiving the staff report.
So just to jump in here, thank you, Sky, and Mr. Rudolph might want to jump in as well. Him and I went over this lots last week to finally end up here, but just some points of clarification. When the member of council brings it to the council meeting and refers it for a staff report, that's only in the cases where there could be implications, which are noted in the policy, where there could be financial implications, legislative implications, other things that council may not have thought of that are involved in actually proceeding with this resolution. So those easy, uncomplicated motions that you would like to bring forward, and at the city clerk level and the CAO level, when you're first creating your notice of motion and letting us know about it, we can determine at that point whether a staff report would really be required. But this is to try to deal with the notices of motions, for you to bring forward your issues, yet not skip that important piece of the implications that need to be considered and possibly looked at prior to implementing or proceeding with that resolution that you would like to make. So this is kind of trying to look at all of the different implications for staff and council and work towards a solution.
If I could also comment?
Yes, Mr. Rudolph, I'll let you go ahead, Councillor Hemmens.
Sorry, just on the introductory piece of this, I think there's just, it would be helpful to have a policy. So just to provide some clarity around this. So there's really a couple of key points in this. One is how do you handle it when you get it on the floor? And I think as a general premise, if it's sufficiently large, then if there's a possibility for financial or policy or that type of thing, then you should probably, as a practice, refer it to for a comprehensive report on that subject matter. That just makes sense. The second piece is, as a courtesy to council, how does council get the heads up that this is coming? Is it appropriate just to read it on the agenda, or would GPC or someplace be a place to raise the subject and say, hey, you know, this is on my mind, I'd like to bring it forward, or some mechanism so that council, and maybe you disagree, but would be given a sort of a preliminary heads up that this is likely an issue and needs to come forward or something like that. So there's a couple of key pieces. One is that we have a policy, whatever you end up with. What's the role of the clerk's office? What's the role of council? What's the role of and so on? And, you know, I think the Legislative Services team would be very helpful to assist any councillor that has an idea that they'd like the wordsmith before it gets too formalized. It's like, how do I do this? And they're obviously going to help right at the get-go. So it doesn't have to get too bureaucratic, but just having a framework would be useful. So it's just, you know, once you receive it on the floor, what's the process that you normally would follow, yes or no? It's just like third reading after public hearing. Do you automatically do it, or do you say, no, we're going to refer this one? And then as a process of discussion and open transparency with council, do you want to utilize the GPC as a place to possibly bring some of those ideas forward and then bring it to the council floor? And, you know, just some thoughts for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not entirely convinced that we need a policy. I think this is something that's already embedded in our procedural bylaw, and we've had maybe some disagreements about how it's been used, when it's been used, why it's been used, and I think that is in many ways the nature of politics. I'm undecided at this point, but I'm not entirely convinced that adding a layer of this is how we do things is going to be conducive to us moving ideas forward at this table. Now, my question, that was preamble in response to Mr. Rudolph, but my question about this diagram specifically is, so we have a member of council identify something they'd like to bring to the table. They work with the city clerk to make sure that the wording is correct. They identify the date that is brought forward, and then that member of council brings it forward at that meeting, and based on the advice the conversation had with the city clerk previously, then immediately refers it to staff for a report, in which case I think that again, it's adding a lot of process around something that is actually meant to be nimble, something that comes quickly.
So the notice of motion, I wouldn't call nimble or quickly, because it does have a two-step process. So say this policy didn't exist, what's in the procedure bylaw and proper procedure is a notice of motion should come to the mayor, CAO, but the city clerk's office, obviously, for being put on the agenda. So say you had a notice of motion that you wanted to be put on the next council agenda, you would let me know as soon as possible before the council agenda was published, if you wanted it to appear on the agenda. If not, at the meeting, we would need it in writing or of some sort, and it would show up on that agenda under notice of motion. Then at the next council meeting, and it wouldn't be discussed at all, at the next meeting is when it would be discussed. So it's not a quick and nimble way to do things. Quick and nimble would be that once council's agenda is in front of it, you do have the power and privilege to do a motion about whatever you want, however you want. However, good governance and good practice would be not to make motions on the fly regarding policy or finance or budgetary implications that haven't had all of the information that you should have before making a decision such as that. So this isn't the quick way to get things on the table. This would slow it down. And the one thing I would just kind of maybe change about the process that you outlined, and it's probably not very clear, is I don't know how much I want to let council know that their motion requires a report or not. I would maybe ask that council, if this motion, or if this policy goes forward, that they kind of think about the implications and whether a staff report would be required, rather than me telling you all that. That's just a thought.
Just quickly, I
Yeah.
think it's the slow it down piece. It's the slow it down piece that I think concerns me a little bit. A question, what is in this new policy that is not in our procedure bylaw around notice of motions?
The member of council at the council meeting referring it to staff. So that could happen in a debate. So you bring forward your notice of motion, it's put on the table. The next meeting, it's moved, seconded. There's a debate. At that point, amongst yourselves, you could decide that it should be referred for a staff report, and that doesn't change the timelines of this process at all. So that's putting that process into play formally, rather than that's what kind of happens right now in some cases. Some cases, council will decide there's no report necessary and will vote in favor of the motion proceeding. And we're still saying that that could and should happen if it's not a resolution that has implications. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm acutely aware of why this is in front of us. And one of the downsides is I'm going to have to start buying my own lunches. But I think we already have at our disposal everything that's in this, that's recommended in this policy. To me, the understanding is, if everything flows well, is that, you know, someone approaches staff with a possible idea of a motion. It gets put on the agenda as a notice, and there's the 2 weeks' notice, because it won't come up until the next council meeting. And at that point, council can decide what they want to do with it, right? They can either, yes, we like this idea, start it, or this needs to go back to staff, or this needs to go to GPC. And so I think those things already exist. And to me, if I look at this, and there are, like, there's reports requesting staff, there's no timelines and stuff like this, could, in theory, things could come back to us in quite a later date. And I just think that what we have right now works, as long as we're all educated on it and know and listen to everyone around us as we go forward, which I like to do on a regular basis. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm for the policy. I think it's needed. I think we don't think about some of the ramifications. Sometimes we get ourselves in trouble legally, which we've seen in the past. I think, as Mr. Rudolph has stated before, he's never seen so many notices of motions. What I was told when I came in, and I've talked to other councillors, is that you go to the CEO, and the CEO says, yeah, it's a good idea, and they get a staff report for it, and then it comes forward from a staff report. Didn't even go to notice of motion. A lot of places that doesn't happen, or if he says it's not something that he's hearing, then yes, it does go to notice of motion. But I think it's really important, because a lot of times when we're making these motions, we don't realize the legal consequences of some of the stuff, and we're going to find ourselves in court. We're going to find ourselves wearing money, like, like a lot of the things that we do rely on the Northwest Treaty Agreement. And if we're not following the procedures outlined in that, we've made a motion, then we're going to be finding ourselves investigated and possibly paying fines. So I think it's really important that those staff reports happen. And part of doing good governance is taking your time and doing it right. It's not hurrying. And I know everybody's new to government, I guess maybe because some of us have been involved in government. We know government moves very slow. And there's a reason for it, and that's so that we do it right the first place, and we don't end up in court, we don't end up in lawsuits. The other thing is sometimes when we put these motions out and it comes back legally can't be done, it stirs up the community for no reason. So if we had the report first, it makes a big difference. So I'm all for getting the staff report first before we make motions on the fly, I think. And Mr. Cuff said the same thing. His conversation's always been that, get your reports, because you don't know all the information. We make assumptions. We can look at, you look at the one with the John Howard Society when we find out that the province wasn't even requested any funding. That's huge. Like, we should have known that, So those are issues. That's why I say we need these reports, because I think it's critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I understand the intent of this, but I think I sort of share the concerns that I don't really see. I actually think it makes it more confusing in the manner of what happens if a particular councillor doesn't want to follow the policy. We have a process. It can be a little messy sometimes, but I think it's working. The most recent one was, I think, probably referred to the place that it should have begun with. I think there's times that we do want to go quickly, and then there's other times where we may want to go slow, but I think it's important to have that debate and come to that conclusion as a council. I think the notice of motion, to me, is one of the only enshrined tools that we really have if we have a particular thing that we want to advance, and I don't think I'm prepared to undermine it in the least. So unless there's a very convincing argument, I would be voting in no of this. Thanks.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. The notice of motion process laid out here, I think, exemplifies the most thorough and well thought out way to have a successful motion come forward and get implemented with staff participation and council trust to get implemented. And I think that we as a council need to trust that everybody is aware of this fulsome process and how it works. However, there is contextual reasons why, some stages you might want to go quicker or not, refer back to staff or go directly to a motion. And I think that we need to trust that each one on council is aware of the full implications if you are skipping a step or not going through with it. And I think that if we can all trust that everyone is using this process intentionally, that's good. And I think that there has been a bit of a gap in trust that people just unintentionally don't realize the full implications. So maybe we're not getting a fulsome discussion with the CAO or staff on potential legal ramifications before this goes out, or doesn't realize that as soon as you put a notice motion on the floor, it sets expectations with the community, and all of a sudden there's a whole lot more community pressure, which could unduly put other councillors under pressure unnecessarily. There are times politically where we may unduly want to put other councillors under pressure to move something forward that hasn't been given attention to the community, and there's resistance on a certain part, and that notice of motion will be theirs. But I want to trust that people get all those implications and are using it intentionally. And so I can see the purpose of this policy as a way to make it clear that everybody's been walked through each step, and this is how we would like things to roll to make sure that we're not going to make any unintended consequences. And that if we don't follow this, we are all very aware of what the implications that we could run into. So is this necessary to make this a policy? I don't know how binding a policy is, because there are times we're not going to be following the policy. I can guarantee you that that's going to happen. And so I don't want to put a policy in place that is going to inhibit our ability to deal with the very complex moving target of the community and of the organization, all the things, when I don't need to. Where trust around how we're going to operate well and effectively as a council is there. So I'm on the fence of whether this is necessary or not. I like it. I like seeing this written out. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I thought Councillor Markman was ahead of me, but I guess not.
I changed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Snellgrove, I just want to make sure that I'm following the steps properly. So somebody on council has an idea that they wish to bring forward as a notice of motion, hopefully related to the strategic plan. So they would check with the city clerk and get advice on proper wording. That's the top box on the right I see. So they would get some help crafting the wording and determine when that notice of motion would come forward, presumably at the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, they would give their notice of motion. So that's fine. And then the meeting following that, now that council has been made aware of that notice of motion, the motion would come forward on the following meeting's agenda. And that relates to the bottom right box as I'm looking at it. Members of council would then debate the motion, not the notice of motion, the motion at that point. And if they weren't comfortable with it or felt there was ramifications, financial or otherwise, we could refer it to staff for a report if we wished. All right, thank you. And then if that happened, staff would bring back the report. It might not happen. We might not feel the need for that. And then we would go on and vote on it. So I think we're sort of overcomplicating this, really. It seems pretty straightforward to me. The only point I would make, or maybe a couple of points, is somebody earlier said they thought what we're doing so far has been working well, and I respectfully disagree. I think there's been a lot of confusion about notices of motion and how they're presented and how they're crafted. And I think it's a really important aspect of our governance. It's the way that we bring things to the floor, and I absolutely think we need to have that, and we need, if not a policy, at least a practice of doing it properly. I would point out, in my opinion, the one point that's maybe missing in that process is the courtesy of informing the mayor of what you have in your mind in terms of a notice of motion, so notifying not just the legislative office, but also the mayor. I like Mr. Rudolph's comment about possibly bringing something to a GPC first for an informal discussion, but I recognize that in some cases something might be more emergent, and so it would come straight as a notice of motion. Fair enough, but I still think we need at least a consistent, proper practice, if not a policy. And I don't know if Ms. Gurry is wanting to comment.
Yes, thank you, Worship. So thank you, Councillor Thorpe, for explaining that so well. If you look at page 56 of your agenda, the one point that you said you thought was missing is there. So in number 1, the member of council identifies the topic, desired outcome, how the resolution adheres to guiding principles of the 2019 to 2022 strategic plan, and drafts a resolution to forward to the city clerk, copying mayor and council and the CAO. So it is right there in number 1. However, the way you've explained the process, I think may require, and based on other council discussion, under number 3, member of council at city council meeting, I think if it said may refer back to staff for a report, I think that would satisfy everybody's concerns, because that doesn't mean you have to.
Right.
It could say may refer back to staff for a report to determine implications, including financial, policy, administrative, legal, etc. So then really what we're doing is laying out the actual process that does exist, just in written format. So we're not changing anything if we said may, because that's not necessary. Council wouldn't have to do that, but it would be a may. And then number 4, city staff reports back to council with a staff report if necessary.
If necessary.
And then city council votes on proposed resolution after receiving staff report, if there was one, on the subject matter. So this is just a draft for discussion, and this has been really helpful. So if council could move this, or move it with changes, or not right now. So just thank you.
So if I may, sorry.
Before you do, Councillor Thorpe, I just want to point something out, because I was going to finish up, and I'm going to jump in slightly ahead and say, look, if you go to page 56, it is quite clear, and I think there's a number of things, and forgive me for doing this, that are important. If you read the policy, it says a notice of motion is the tool that council members use to bring forward topics for consideration at a council meeting. Prior to a member of council bringing forward a notice of motion, it is recommended these steps be followed, and then goes on to talk about the steps, which includes, with great respect, I think one of the most important aspects of this is, and that is, it's not topic, it's desired outcome. And that, if we don't have a notice of motion that is clear, that is worded in such a way that it satisfies the city clerk, that it directs you to the desired outcome, then we're really going to be in trouble and waste a lot of time. I don't think you need to add anything to 3. This is the recommended, these are recommended steps. In other words, everything is covered by the first 3 lines where it says these are the recommended steps. With great respect, I don't think you need to add in should or may or can be or whatever. I think it's gilding the lily unnecessarily. But I think it's a really important series of steps, because referring it back to staff for a report is the recommended thing. We don't have to do it, but it's always wise. That's my pitch on this. I think the whole thing, the way it is worded, is actually quite artfully done, and with great respect, I say with compliments to staff, contained on 1 page. Reagan would be happy. And I'm not saying you can reduce things to 1 page all the time, but I think this sets out a very clear recommended process, which is what this is. This is a policy. This is not the law. It does not say thou shalt or thou shalt not. This is just the recommended policy. Councillor Thorpe, please carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that. And maybe I'm the only one who was confused by this, but I read it to mean that the notice of motion would be referred to staff for a report, which I don't think was the intent at all. There might be a referral after the actual motion gets to the table. So I might be more comfortable adding in those words may or shall, but I recognize the mayor's point, and aside from that, I think it's pretty straightforward, and I don't think I would have a problem with it. Thank you.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm trying to be really clear in my thinking on this one. I have reservations, and I will begin by addressing those reservations by reflecting on something Councillor Bonner said when he first took the mic on this issue, and that's that we know why this is in front of us. And I feel that we have a number of friendly agreements on this council that have been made because process, can be a little messy, and okay, so we're going to do it this way, and we all agree, yes, we're going to do it that way. This feels a little like, things were a bit messy, as they can be in the beginning, the first year of a term of a brand new council. And rather than just making hey, this is how we're going to do it going forward, we're embedding something in policy that actually doesn't need to be in policy. And to your point, Councillor Thorpe, you said you're looking for a practice, not a policy, and that's something I really agree with. We have a number of practices that we've agreed upon. Late delegations is one of them. We discussed it tonight. We didn't embed that in policy. And to your point, Your Worship, for me, I hear that a policy isn't a law. It's something we should be following. But when I read a policy, prior to a member of council bring forward a notice of motion, it's recommended that these steps be followed. Why does that? Why are we even talking about policy if it's recommended? We should all just do that and take care of each other and understand we're all following the same process and why. But if there's no ability then to say, oh, you didn't follow policy and therefore these are the repercussions, then I don't know that I see the point of the entire policy. So it feels a little personal to me. It doesn't strike me as something powerful, and I think policy should be powerful. And I think we have a number of We have a number of instances where we have agreed to something because it makes sense, and we've implemented a practice as a group, and it didn't need to be embedded in policy, and I would say this is probably one of those times. I will not be voting in favor of this.
Councillor Martin.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Gurry, did you
That's,
want to?
she can go first, I'll wait.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I like Councillor Thorpe. I like the word of may being in there, even though I understand now that everything's a recommendation, so technically it could change. But the reason why it said just a member of council. So that to me means somebody could bring forward a notice of motion after the wording and everything has been put into place. But what happens if nobody else on council actually even wants it referred to staff? Because it's something that, and the instance that comes forward to me is when I was on the school board, it was a very contentious issue, and there was a trustee who brought forward a notice of motion to ban the red dads, blue dads, or whatever type of elementary school book. And he brought forward as a notice of motion that he wanted this banned, and nobody would even second it. It didn't even get to the table. It didn't get discussed. Is there still the ability to do that?
Your worship, if there's no seconder, then nothing happens. The motion
Right.
is dead, not on the floor.
Okay, but the way it reads here, I'm looking at, and that's why I prefer the word may, because it sounds like it absolutely has to go to staff for a report. I would rather it just, that's up to council to decide. I guess the word that I'm looking at is member of council versus members of council on deciding on the deferring.
Any member of council, so member of council refers back to staff.
Okay,
So any member of council, but preferably, and the intent behind it was the member that came up with the motion in the first place would know that it needed to be referred back to staff.
And
That was the
then-
intention behind it.
and if I may, and then the discussion would take place whether or not we actually wanted to defer it to staff
Refer, yeah.
or refer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
The motion, yes, I mean, unless I'm completely off base here, at what we'll call step 3, at that point, the motion, it has to go on the table before anything happens, before it goes to staff.
Correct.
I mean, that's the whole point of it, and it's at that point you're going to make the referral to staff after the motion has been introduced and it has a seconder. That's going to kill it right then and there. This doesn't derogate from the existing overriding process by which we govern our meetings. And so, I mean, I understand Councillor Hemmond's remarks, but this is a policy that says this is what we recommend you do when you bring forward a notice of motion. But it still means when you get to step 3, so to speak, after you've discussed with the city clerk, you've arrived at wording that hopefully meets the desired outcome that you as a councillor think is appropriate, you're going to bring it to the council meeting. It's going to be a notice of motion, and somebody's going to move it, and if somebody doesn't second it, game's over. We don't have to worry about the rest of the policy. But if somebody moves and seconds it, that's the point at which presumably, if there is some general consensus that it is a worthwhile topic, that we are likely to potentially pass it, that's the point at which we're going to refer it back to staff for a much more fulsome discussion, if you will, at a future date of all of those implications that flow from it, as opposed to, well, we all like this, let's just pass it. One would hope that we as council will want to pass it on to staff, but at that point we're going to have to do that initial weighing of whether or not it's even worthwhile passing to staff for work.
And
Councillor?
Your worship, if I could just, there's a couple things I just wanted to clarify as well. This originally started as we were thinking of calling it a procedure. There is no council procedures. Our bylaw that was adopted last year allows for policies or procedures to complement it. As for repercussions, when it comes to policy, not even the community charter has repercussions when it's not followed. So that isn't really standard, unfortunately, for whether or not council or staff don't adhere to the community charter or the procedure bylaw or policies, it's really hard to implement or have repercussions for them to follow. So that was just one point I wanted to make. So this was started as a procedure. We called it a policy because we don't have any council procedures per se, so we called it a policy. It is intended to just be a guideline of what the appropriate process is or should be. And not just for council having the heads up or the repercussions that could follow, but sometimes staff is put in a place where we have to, at a meeting, let council know that this isn't a good idea, or let council know of the implications. And so sometimes it can be an uncomfortable position for staff to be in, to have to, in that position, what the implications are, et cetera. So it's kind of, it's not just for council and your working relationship, but also sometimes what the staff and implications are for us. Just to be frank.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry, because this does remind us that throwing a topic to staff is one thing on which they could spend the rest of their working lives, as opposed to putting a notice of motion in front of them, which is much more specific, or as my friend with the lisp used to say, specific, and which they can offer a much more fruitful and robust answer that will in fact guide council in determining what it's going to do. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I do agree with Councillor Hammonds, but I've also heard a variety of opinions at the table, and I think if this is just to outline practice, and it makes folks feel comfortable having a practice in place, that, and also serve as an educational piece for not just ourselves, but new individuals that might fill these seats, I can support that. However, I do think it is important to have, in that number 3, may refer back to staff. One, because I don't think it's always good to go back to staff for a variety of reasons. One being that it can just eat a whole lot of time, staff time, that it doesn't need to. If everybody supports or everybody's against, let's just make that decision. And the other concern I have, if this was just to be a practice, is on number 1, copying mayor and council. I have no issue with copying the mayor. I think that's his role, and dialogue with the mayor is important. I do have an issue copying all of council because I think it makes it far too easy to engage in debate over email, which to me is a worse practice that I think we probably need a policy for. That would be my one comment.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I agree 100% with the statements of Councillor Brown. I think that this is an important document as an onboarding for new councillors that are very clear. I can see the staff's conundrum of where exactly does it get placed, whether it's a policy or procedure. To me, there's no ramification, so there's not really a point of having it as a policy, because if somebody doesn't follow the policy, there's no major recourse anyhow. So at least it is a place where this can be kept, that all councils should be, and new councillors should be reading through the policies and be very versed with them. So I like having this written down there, and I feel no concern of losing my autonomy or ability to make a notice of a motion and get a particular item on the agenda to represent the community with this policy in place. So I'll be supporting this recommendation, and
thank you very
consider
much.
moving it pretty soon here.
I note we have 10 minutes left and several items. We're not going to get to all of them, obviously. Councillor Bonner, and then...
Jake had something.
Yeah, make yourself comfortable. I appreciate Councillor Hammond's remarks, but I would just like to let everybody know, including staff, I don't consider this personal, right? I warned everybody when we started that I had unbridled enthusiasm for this job. I think I'm proving it. I do have some recommendations. That is, if we want to go down this line, I do have, actually, I wrote out a bunch of changes that I wouldn't mind seeing. I'd be fine with just giving it to staff and they can tell me whether they're not good or not. I'm fine with that. So if we are to go down this road, I don't think it's necessarily necessary. I think that each council just needs to know how the best practices are, and that's something we should learn. But I'm ambivalent. Like, I do have some suggestions that I have that would tighten it up. I think your point there earlier about number 3, I think it's a week ahead of its time, because number 3 is just going forward as a notice of motion. So is it our practice now that we're going to take notice of motions and act on them, or are they literally just in the agenda as a notice of motion, and we act them on the following council meeting?
With respect, item 3 is member of council at city council meeting. So if it's got to the city council meeting, it has to come by way of notice of motion to get it on the agenda in the first place, right? It's not a GPC meeting.
Yeah, but we wouldn't necessarily do anything with a notice of motion. We would do something with a motion.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't refer it to staff at a notice of motion stage.
Correct. Ms. Gurry. Good point there, Councillor Bonner.
That's a very good point, actually, and I think the intention was initially, but just before I explain all that, I think based on this discussion, based on the feedback of going down this road, maybe we should put this off to a next GPC meeting, just with some additional changes, if council thinks it's necessary. But very good point, Councillor Bonner. Initially, what the point around number 3 is at the notice of motion stage, when it was on the table, that incorporated into that notice of motion was a staff report, or if necessary. So it's accounted for, yet it's not accounted for the next step after that, so you're correct.
So in light of Ms. Gurry's sage remarks, and Councillor Bonner, not wishing to cut you off, this is a George Cuff moment, first heard deferred, so to speak. Unless someone objects, I think we let it go back to staff, having heard a fulsome discussion, but not decision this afternoon, a fulsome discussion, and maybe some wording adjustments that would, I think, satisfy a number of the concerns that have been legitimately raised by many members of this council, and move us forward with a policy that will make us relatively happy, understanding in a more fulsome way as well what the policy implications are. If I don't hear any objections, I don't think a motion is required, is it, Ms. Gurry?
No, we can.
Put it on the
We can just put it off, that there, due to time constraints, we've referred it to the next
agenda.
meeting.
Excellent, thank you. The next item, and I'm looking at the time and trying to be realistic. I don't wish to try and engage in the recommended motion, a discussion around that, around the Nanaimo Youth Advisory Council. We have a in-camera meeting to proceed at 4 o'clock. So unless someone objects mightily, I'm going to suggest that someone make a motion for an adjournment of the meeting. Ms. Gurry, is there any reason?
So would you want the items that haven't been addressed brought forward to the next GPC? The items that haven't been addressed brought forward to the next GPC meeting? Okay.
I don't think there's any alternative.
Okay.
Unless someone wishes to.
Oh, just your worship, you might want to deal with, before an adjournment, the letter, the recommendation, and then we'll refer all the other matters to the next GPC.
All right, thank you. That's a wise suggestion. Let me just say very quickly what this arises from. This arises from a meeting Mr. Lindsay and myself had in the absence of Mr. Rudolph with local taxi owners. As you know, the provincial government tossed the issue to the Passenger Transportation Board, I believe it's called, the PTB. And the implications are that there will be sort of different rules for the modern folks and different rules for the old folks. And by the old folks, I mean the taxi operators as they exist to are now required by rules, for instance, to provide drivers and vehicles capable of handling people with disabilities, which won't apply. Also geographic restrictions. I was asked by them, and I state categorically in my previous time as MLA that I have always taken the position that the rules should apply equally across the board in respect of public safety, notwithstanding the great desire to move forward with ride-hailing in that broad topic. What I was hoping for was a recommendation that not as worded, and that's my fault for not communicating appropriately with staff, and I take full and complete responsibility for that. not to support what is called for by the Mayor Stewart of Coquitlam, but basically to call for the Passenger Transportation Board and the government to ensure that the playing field is level, so that if you're going to have ride-hailing services, they'll have to face the same issues around carrying people with disabilities and any other things that are required, whether it be medical certification, the appropriate licensing requirements, the appropriate skill level, etc. I'm not looking to deal with this in 3 minutes in light of the time, but that's my point. Councillor Brown.
So, Your Worship, I did adjust the recommendation at the late items. So the motion as I have it is that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommend that Council support the taxi industry's request to provide a level playing field with all transportation providers. And so you could address that right now if you choose.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Bonner. I do not want to rush this discussion. That was not my desire. Unless I sense that there's a solid majority here, without calling for the vote now, I'd rather have a more fulsome discussion at a future date, even though the request is to have this done quickly. Councillor Gesselbach.
I just want clarification on the deadline that this decision needs to be made. When does this?
There is not a deadline per se, but I'm looking at our time schedule as council.
Deadline for the letter.
I actually am not sure if it's on
No.
the agenda. It should be in there.
Not a deadline per
But,
se.
Your Worship, so then a motion to defer to the next meeting would be, you could actually even bring it to the council meeting on Monday. So that would need to be seconded and passed.
So moved by Councillor Bonner, seconded by Councillor Gesselbrock. All those in favor of deferral to next meeting? Opposed? Thank you very much. You're very kind and indulgent. I do appreciate that. A motion to adjourn now. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Emmons. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. It's been a very useful afternoon, I think, for everybody. I think he would.
Huh?
Sorry?